Chapter 64. The sound of the wind disappeared at this moment, and there was a terrible silence. Ling Li looked into the girl's dark eyes, and his heart couldn't help beating wildly. He was almost 80% sure about the identity of the girl in front of him, but when he saw Su Li's reaction, he suddenly felt cold. Su Li's eyes were dim, and a moment of confusion flashed through her eyes. After a moment of silence, she suddenly made an inexplicable self-mockery. "Who is Shui? Who is she to you?" Ling Li's heart thumped. Wasn't she? He wanted to see any trace of pretense from Su Li's face, but he was disappointed. Su Li let out a series of low laughter, and her calm tone was brewing a strong magma-like anger. "I have done so much, but you think I am Shui?" Ling Li didn't realize the seriousness of the matter. He coughed twice and said, "Don't get me wrong. I just asked casually. Since you are not her, forget it." Before he finished his words, Ling Li saw the girl throw something over. He subconsciously took it and opened his palm. His face immediately darkened. This was the hierarch's token that he had just given out. Then, the girl's voice sounded, and the tone was calm and peaceful. "Hierarch Ling must have an ulterior motive to give me this jade pendant. Now that you know that I am not her, I can't take this jade pendant. Hierarch, have an early rest today and leave tomorrow." Speaking of this, Su Li smiled lightly. She was no longer moody and rude. Instead, she waved her hand gracefully. "Goodbye, Ling Li." Seeing Su Li turned around without reluctance and slowly disappeared on the valley path, Ling Li was in a daze. He suddenly felt that he seemed to have lost something very important. He wanted to ask Su Li to turn back, but he racked his brains and couldn't find any reason to make her turn back. She was just a pretty girl from a humble family in the Desu town. While he was in a precarious situation, it seemed that he had a bright future, but in fact, every step he took was on the edge of a knife. Why should he drag her into trouble and put her in danger? Maybe I shouldn't think too much. The fate is over. Ling Li glanced at the jade pendant in his hand and silently put it away. The deep sigh slowly disappeared in the night. The next morning, Su Li rushed over and didn't see Ling Li and Ling Mo again. It seemed that this month was just a dream. Now they woke up and left without leaving any trace. "Su Li, are you stupid? Why did you return the jade token? That's good stuff." Seeing Su Li coming, Chu Qingning said with pity, "That is the young master of the Enma cult. His personal jade token must be very powerful. You are so stupid to return the jade token." Su Li shook her head slightly. "Even if we take it, we don't need it. It's better not to take it." "What you said seems to make sense," Chu Qingning said and took out a wooden token and handed it to Su Li, but Ling Li didn't think so. "You didn't accept the jade token, so he gave you this wooden token. Although it is not as powerful as the jade token, it can also mobilize people of the Enma cult in Qinghe province." Su Li narrowed her eyes and hesitated for a moment. She took the wooden token and put it close to her body. Without saying anything, she turned around and left the valley. Chu Qingning scratched his head and couldn't help but say to himself, "I really don't understand. What's wrong with them?" 3 days later, a luxurious carriage passed by on the smooth official road. Ling Li put on the jadebone mask again. Through the gap of the curtain, it could be seen that Ling Mo, who was driving the carriage, wore a bamboo hat and gray linen clothes, which was the standard dress of a coachman. "Master, we will arrive in Yunjing City in 2 days," Ling Li said lightly absent-mindedly. He touched his lips with his fingertips, as if there was still a little softness on that day. He thought that he would not think about it when he stopped thinking about it. But he found that even if he didn't think about it, the temperamental and slightly barbaric petite figure would appear in his mind from time to time. Distracting thoughts. Su Li, it only took you a month to replace Shui as my new devil in mind." There was another sigh in the carriage. Ling Mo twitched his mouth and showed a little strange. Since the master left the valley, he seemed to be a little abnormal. Was he infected by the crazy woman? In his short life of more than 10 years, he had never had contact with a woman. When it came to understanding women, he was even worse than Ling Li. In his eyes, the temperamental Su Li became a real crazy woman. On the second day after Ling Li left, Su Li completely returned to normal. Her daily schedule was full and she was very busy. Compared with Ling Li, She knew more about what was going to happen in this life. She was more clear about the urgency of time and didn't allow her to waste time to be sad. It was worth mentioning that when she detoxified the poison for Lingli that day, she was impacted, which led to several cracks in the bottleneck. Because of these cracks, Suli saved 3 months of hard practice and broke through to the inborn first hurdle in advance. The impurities were removed from the body after the marrow cleansing. The bones in her body were as clear as jade, just like the high-quality chalcedony. It could be seen that the pure and flawless blood ran through the tendons and vessels. After washing off the overflowing dirt, Suli found that her skin became more delicate and white. It was as smooth as congealed fat, and it was cool and moist. Is this the ice skin and jade skin? Suli thought for a while. It was said that the ice skin and jade skin was the talent physique pursued by every woman in the martial arts circle. With this physique, women would get twice the result with half the effort and many benefits when they practiced the inattribute martial arts. She stumbled to the inborn hurdle alone in the previous life. Of course, she didn't have such benefits. Now she accidentally opened the ice skin and jade skin, but she still needed time to understand it. After the breakthrough, Suli had new insights in cooking, cultivation, and medical circle. This was a gift from heaven and earth. During this period, inspiration burst out constantly. No matter what Suli did, she was extremely efficient. She originally enjoyed it very much, but a month later, she found that something was wrong. Because she had almost read all the books collected by Qi Xianqing. Qi Xianqing also had a premonition that the time of leaving this time would not be too short, so he left a lot of books for Suli to read by herself. However, he misjudged the progress of Suli's Xiangong, and the more than enough books had been finished. When Suli was thinking, Mammy Li suddenly rushed in from the door and said happily, "Miss, great news." Suli came to her sense and was about to ask in detail. There was another figure behind Mammy Li. It was Su Huanli, who hadn't seen her for a long time. "Li, how are you living in the Baiwei building? I really wronged you." Su Huanli's tone was extremely affectionate and full of guilt. "Today, I come here to send you the student letter." "Admission?" Su Li's beautiful eyes showed doubts. "Daddy, what is the student letter?" "You see, I don't know when Mr. Qi will come back. I am also afraid of delaying your studies. You might as well go to the girls' school in Muyang Town to make do. It is the best girls' school in the nearby town. The teaching conditions there are only a little worse than the girls' school in Qinghe province." "I see." Suli nodded and looked a little moved. She said, "I didn't expect that when you are busy, you still care about your daughter's affairs. You are really tired." "Haha." Su Huanli heard it and laughed. "Don't thank me. This is proposed by your grandma. Maybe because she felt guilty for driving you out of the house last time, she took the initiative to mention you to me today, which really surprised me." "Oh?" Suli was slightly moved. She knew the old woman's temperament. It was absolutely not a good arrangement. There must be a trap waiting for her. "I am afraid that you will delay the business of the Baiwei building, so I specially prepared a faster carriage for you. Zipei will also go with you. She can take care of you." Su Huanli seemed to have arranged everything for her. Obviously, Suli couldn't refuse. She didn't know what guarantee he got from Mam Su Chui. He worked so hard. Suli accepted the student letter and nodded to thank Su Huanli. Su Huanli left with relief. He didn't expect that this trip was so easy. Fortunately, he got part of the land of the old house from his mother. After Su Huanli left, Mammy Li quietly walked into the room. She didn't look happy and said with worry, "Miss, since it is the order of the old lady, I am afraid that there is a trap. You should be careful." Suli glanced at Mammy Li and sneered in her heart. Even Mammy Li could easily see it, but Su Huanli pretended to be confused. He was really her good father. Thinking so in her heart, Suli smiled and said, "It happens that I have read almost all the books left by the master. It is good to go to the Muyang girls' school. Mammy, don't think too much. It is a place where the ladies of the scholarly families gather. There will be no dirty things. Don't worry." "Is that so?" Mammy Li was confused. She was not educated. Hearing Su Li's words, she immediately believed it. She murmured, "The old lady has a conscience. I can't believe it." On the other side, Zhu Yin, who was nourishing the fetus in the Su house, heard the news. She was also indignant and hurried to find Ma'am Su Chui. Mother, I can understand that you arranged a girls' school for Zipei. Why did you arrange a girls' school for Area? Yes, Grandma. Su Zipei also chimed in and said with grievance, Grandma, didn't you say that you would not let Area live a good life? Why did you spend money to send her to the girls' school? Ma'am. Su Chui smiled happily and touched Su Zipei's little head. She said, You are not like a madam and a miss of a noble family. You should learn to be calm in the face of trouble. I have already arranged the girls' school. Of course, I will arrange it. Speaking of this, ma'am, Su Chui looked serious and said, I didn't expect that in just half a year, Area became a talented girl in the mouth of the people in the Desu town. When I went out, I heard that the second miss of the Su family was talented and beautiful. I can't easily hurt her because of her reputation. Otherwise, it will have an impact on the Su family. Su Zipei's eyes brightened. She said, So, Grandma, you arranged her to go to the girls' school. If she makes a fool of herself in the girls' school, it will be easy to deal with it. Zipei is so smart. Ma'am, Su Chui laughed more happily, as if she had already seen Su Li's embarrassing appearance because of her. The next morning, the carriage to the girls' school stopped early at the gate of the byway building. Su Li took the dictionary of Dahan, whose cover was dyed black. She didn't take anything else and got into the carriage. Su Zipei had been waiting in the carriage for a long time. When she saw Su Li coming in, she couldn't help but snort. When she saw the black cover in Su Li's hand, she immediately sneered and said, Second sister, why do you still use this dictionary? It has been dyed black by ink. It's better to throw it away and change another one. As she said, she showed off the bookcase beside her. There was a brand new and shiny dictionary of Dahan in it. It was the latest edition that she had just bought. Su Li smiled and shook her head. She said, Thank you for your concern, third sister. This is enough for me. Although the cover is black, the inside is not polluted. No matter how good the cover of the dictionary is, you still can't read the whole book overnight. Su Zipei was so angry that her beautiful eyes widened. She screamed and scolded, Su Li, don't be arrogant. This is the girls' school that my grandma arranged for me. You were just a maid incidentally. When we go to the school later, remember to hold the bookcase for me. Otherwise, I will make you unable to enter the gate of the girls' school. Su Li didn't say anything. It seemed that she was afraid and didn't refute. Chapter 65. The carriage galloped all the way. Su Li and Su Zipei finally arrived at the Muyang town before 7 a.m. The area of the Muyang town was 3 times larger than that of the Desu town. It was a veritable big town. Its prosperity was far greater than that of the Desu town. This was also the reason why the Muyang Girls' School could become the first girls' school after the Qinghe Girls' School. Su Zipei carefully opened the curtain. She was full of novelty, like a village woman entering the city. When pedestrians saw her expression, they couldn't help but snigger. Su Zipei reacted and hurriedly put down the curtain. Her face was very red. She pretended that nothing had happened and peeped at Su Li. However, she saw that Su Li was resting with her eyes closed. She didn't open the curtain at all. Fortunately, she didn't see me. While she was thinking about it, the coachman's voice suddenly sounded from outside. Miss, we have arrived at the girls' school. Su Zipei quickly tidied up a well-dressed dress, opened the curtain, and walked down. Su Li glanced at the book cylinder still in front of her. She slowly took out all the things in the book cylinder and then walked down the carriage with the empty book cylinder. What came into view was a square. The surrounding field of vision was wide. Flowers of various colors were blooming in the flower bed. Red bricks and green tiles could be faintly seen in the dense forest. This is the Muyang Girls' School. The houses are so beautiful. There are so many flowers in the flower bed that I have never seen before. I am so lucky to enter the Muyang Girls' School. In addition to Su Li and Su Zipei, there were many well-dressed misses in the square. All of them had outstanding temperament. At this moment, they whispered in groups of 3 or 5. Their words were full of admiration for the Muyang Girls' School. Su Li held the book cylinder in her hand and didn't dress very luxuriously. Many maids held the book cylinder in their arms and subconsciously regarded Suli as a maid like them. They whispered in private, "Who is she? She doesn't look like a maid from her dress. But why is she holding the book cylinder in her hand? I am afraid that she is the maid of the mist next to her." Suzy Pei listened to these and felt a sense of success. However, Suli's expression didn't change. She still held the book cylinder and looked around. Not long after, a middle-aged woman in a navy blue palace dress came slowly. Her posture was very elegant and her voice was clear. "I'm Lecturer Ning of the Muyang School. All the students who are enrolled today come to me and hand in their admission letters in turn." When the voice came out, a group of girls immediately rushed to Lecturer Ning. Suzy Pei wanted to catch up with them, but Suli slowed down. Suzy Pei was so angry that her face was slightly pale. But because the book cylinder was still in Suli's hand, she could only slow down. The speed at which the admission letters were checked was very slow. The procession had only gone through a small part of the procession when it was already noon. A group of pampered young ladies showed impatience on their faces. Several of them sent their maids forward to inquire, but they were stopped by the academy's steward. Suzy Pei was extremely annoyed. If it weren't for Suli, she might have gone in. Why did he have to suffer under the sun here? His skin was almost tanned. These impetuous young ladies didn't notice that Lecturer Ning was looking at them. The test began from the first step of entering the Muyang school, and most of these ignorant young ladies had not noticed it. Finally, Lecturer Ning's eyes fell on several people, and she nodded slightly. Because Suli was carrying the book cylinder, she was mistakenly regarded as a maid. Lecturer Ning's eyes never stayed on her for a moment. After looking at them, Lecturer Ning sped up. The procession was shortened quickly. Soon it was Suzy Pei's turn. Suzy Pei took out a neatly folded admission letter from her arms and handed it to Lecturer Ning respectfully. Lecturer Ning slightly nodded, thinking that although this girl was a little impetuous, she was modest and polite, which was not bad. "Next!" the steward shouted loudly. At the same time, he stepped aside to let Suzy Pei enter the gate. Suddenly, he frowned. Seeing that Suli didn't go in, he couldn't help but scold. "What are you doing? Hurry up and go in with your miss." Suzy Pei saw this scene inside and laughed happily. She expected Suli to show her anger and directly annoy Lecturer Ning, but she was disappointed. Suli smiled slightly and shook her head. She said calmly, "Steward, I am not a maid, but a student who comes to enter the school." The steward was stunned when he heard that. Seeing that Suli had taken out the admission letter, he was more embarrassed. He cursed in his heart. How could she come to the school without a maid? Which miss is so embarrassed? Lecturer Ning was also secretly surprised. She took the admission letter and unfolded it. It was Suli from the Su family. It turned out to be her. Lecturer Ning frowned secretly. She didn't pay attention to the girl's expression and reaction because of the misunderstanding. She miscalculated. "You go in. Next time, let your sister take the book cylinder by herself." Her eyesight was so sharp that she looked back at Suzy Pei, who was gloating. She immediately understood the ins and outs of the matter. Suzy Pei was as narrow-minded as rumored. She liked to play small tricks. It was really difficult for her to enter the Hall of Elegance. Suli chuckled and didn't hide the situation inside the book cylinder. She said, "I just hope my sister doesn't blame me." When Lecturer Ning saw that the book cylinder was empty, she was even more surprised. Then a trace of appreciation flashed through her eyes. She didn't teach weak and incompetent people. If they were bullied, they should retaliate immediately. Obviously, Suli's approach was very to her taste. After entering the school, they were led by the supervisor. Suli and others soon came to a classroom. Without any delay, the first lesson of Muyang School began quickly. Sitting behind the teacher's desk was an old teacher with gray hair. He held a wooden ruler in his hand and looked stern. "You are all misses from big families in the nearby towns. Today's first lesson is the foundation of literacy. It is also the first test. According to your literacy level, you will be divided into different classes. Now, open your dictionary of Dahan." As soon as the old teacher finished his words, there was a neat sound under the podium. All the misses put the dictionary of Dahan on the table. When Suli took out the pitch-black dictionary of Dahan, It immediately caused a burst of laughter. What the hell is this? Dictionary of Dahan? It seems that there is no such version. Is it possible that she bought a pirated version printed on the street? The room immediately became noisy. The old teacher frowned and fiercely patted the table twice. He shouted, "Silence!" The whole scene immediately became quiet. Everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter. They almost forgot that they were not in the school at home. The old teacher snorted coldly and looked at Suli coldly. "You, stand up and answer. I asked you to take out the Dictionary of Dahan. What did you take out?" Suli stood up and said in a respectful tone without fear, "Sir, this is indeed the Dictionary of Dahan printed by the government. But the ink on the cover is broken. There is no pollution inside. I am reluctant to throw it away, so I keep it with me." As she said, Suli opened the first page, which was densely covered with small footnotes. The rich miss next to her widened her eyes. The old teacher found the abnormality and was curious. He couldn't help but say, "Let me have a look." Suli immediately handed it to the manservant. When the old teacher got the Dictionary of Dahan, his turbid eyes couldn't help but brighten. He turned it page by page, but he found that every page was covered with footnotes. Until the last page, he felt that the footnotes were sparse. "Good." The old teacher smiled and praised her generously. "What's your name?" "My name is Suli, Su as in Gusu, and Li as in Leanly." "Good. You don't have to take part in this test. You can directly go to Class A." The old teacher directly made the decision. Suli raised her eyebrows and thought that the old teacher was really bold. Other people had already been stunned. Class A was the best literacy class for cultivating girls in Muyang. It was said that half of the people in it could become female officials of the imperial court. How could Suli take out a black book and directly go there without doing anything? What was different about that black book? Suzy Pei sat aside and felt jealous and regretful. If she had known that Suli's book was so useful, she would have grabbed it earlier. Damn it. Why? "Sir, I don't accept it." The atmosphere was silent for a moment. Finally, someone couldn't help standing up and shouting. They were all the pearls of their families. They strived to do the best in everything. How could they allow someone to climb over their heads without doing anything? Even if you don't accept it, you have to accept it. This is my classroom, the Muyang school, not your home. The old teacher stared and was obviously angry. He said, "If you don't care about my teaching, you can leave." As soon as the words came out, the face of the miss who stood up changed from green to white. It was very ugly. At this time, Suli spoke. "Sir, I don't want to cause criticism. I believe that I can enter Class A with my own strength. Please treat me equally." Hearing that, the old teacher immediately smiled and said, "Good. I approve. You continue to sit down and take the test." The miss who stood up also breathed a sigh of relief and sat down slowly. Although Suli helped her out of trouble, she didn't feel grateful at all. Instead, she felt that Suli was hypocritical and really annoying. After the disturbance, Suzy Pei looked around and found that everyone used the same Dictionary of Dahan as Suli. They didn't buy the latest version. She immediately felt happy and opened the book tube to put her hand in. As soon as she put her hand in, the smile on Suzy Pei's face disappeared instantly and her face became pale. "This book tube, when was it empty? What are you doing?" The old teacher's stern words suddenly appeared in her ears. Suzy Pei trembled and looked up. She saw the old teacher standing in front of her. She was so scared that she shrank back and fell directly from the seat. The old teacher's face was strange. He bent down to pick up the book tube, but his hand was light. He made a sound of surprise and opened it. He immediately became angry. "Well, I have been teaching for many years, but it is the first time that I see a student who comes to class without a book. Get out of here. You are not allowed to take the test this time. Go to Class Gue tomorrow and start from the beginning." Class Gue was the last of the 10 heavenly stems. It was easy to imagine what Class Gue was like. Suzy Pei was suddenly stunned by the scolding and her mind was in a mess. She clearly remembered that she had filled the book tube. How could it be empty? Along the way, Suli clearly took it well. "Wait a minute. Suli, you hurt me." Suzy Pei suddenly screamed through the air like a ghost, which scared the old teacher. He angrily called a manservant to drag Susie Pei out. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you make a noise in the school? Who allowed such a student to come in? You are just a rat's shit. The old teacher was so angry that he even said rat shit. Obviously, he was dizzy because of Susie Pei's barbaric behavior. Sulie sat in the same place, looking down and waiting for the test to begin. Next, the whole test seemed to be calm. Every time the manservant reported the number of pages and lines of a dictionary of Dahan, Sulie was always the first to say it. The old teacher's anger was almost gone. When he looked at Sulie, he smiled again. Although the students accepted this year were a mix of good and bad, there were still surprises. This little girl had some skills. When she entered the Jia class, he would definitely teach her well. Next, announced the class list. Sulie, Class Jia. Mei Ruhan, Class Bing. Except that Sulie was in Class Jia, there was no one in Class B. There was only one in Class C, which was the girl who sat beside Sulie with a shocked look. Most of the others were in Class D and Class E. Chapter 66. After the class, Sulie was directly called away by the old teacher, which made everyone in the classroom envious. Sulie followed the old teacher to a ventilated tea house. The old teacher didn't put on airs. He let Sulie sit down and said with a smile, "Little girl, your name is Sulie, right?" "Yes, sir." Sulie sat respectfully and said in a gentle tone, "It was my younger sister who was driven out by you. My sister was spoiled by my mother since she was a child. Please don't mind." Ha 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 ha. Seeing that Sulie said it so straightforwardly, the old teacher didn't want to ask about the book tube. He changed the topic and asked, "I read your annotations on the dictionary of Dahan. Every word is a gem. Some insights even I can't understand. I'm afraid that you have a very good teacher before. May I know his name?" "My teacher is Qi Xianqing. He is a doctor of the Baichao Tang in the town. I don't know his specific background," Sulie asked tentatively, but the old teacher was directly stunned and said, "It turned out to be that person." Sure enough, the old teacher came to his sense and his attitude immediately changed. He said in an equal tone, "Little friend, what do you call him? Is he a teacher or a teacher?" Sulie raised her eyebrows slightly. The old guy seemed to know a lot, but she couldn't ask more now. She could only answer honestly, "It's my teacher." Qi Xianqing didn't ask her to hide it. So, she simply said everything to get some information. The old teacher was immediately more shocked. He looked at Sulie back and forth, as if he wanted to see through Sulie's background. Sulie pretended to be confused and asked in a low voice, "Sir, what are you looking at? What is the identity of my teacher? Why are you so shocked?" The old teacher immediately shook his head and said, "Since your teacher didn't tell you, I don't dare to ask. But I shouldn't. Since you have been taught by him, why do you come here?" "Sir, you don't know. This time, it's my family's idea that I come here." Sulie said and sighed faintly, "Master left 2 months ago, and I don't know where he went. It may be a long time before he comes back. I have read all the books he left. It happens that my grandma signed me up to come here, so I want to see how the collection of books is." The old man gave a hollow laugh and said, "I'm afraid to disappoint you. The collection of our Muyang Academy can't be compared with that of Mr. Qi. Qi Tai something, not Miracle Dr. Qi." It seemed that the old man had another identity. Sulie got some news and felt satisfied. She chatted with the old man for a while, and then left alone. After Sulie left, the elder frowned. If he let Sulie waste her time here, how could he be worthy of Teacher Qi? "Father, what are you thinking about?" At this time, a woman came in from outside the door. It was Lecturer Ning who had collected admission letters in front of the gate. "Qing, you come at the right time." The old master waved his hand and said, "I saw Sulie today. She is very talented. I couldn't help but call her over to ask her about her master. Who would have thought that she was actually Master Qi's last disciple?" Ning Qing was surprised and said, "Isn't she your junior sister apprentice?" "It shouldn't be. How could Grand Tutor Qi still be alive? You were only 16 years old when you were apprenticed. Grand Tutor Qi was 60 years old. Now it has been more than 60 years. How could anyone live to 120 years old?" The old master's face immediately became serious and he said, "Master is a real immortal on Earth. How can we measure him?" Ning Qing didn't take it seriously. Even if her father had told her 10,000 times that Grand Tutor Qi was a real immortal on Earth and the most talented person in the whole Dahan country, she didn't see it with her own eyes. How could she believe it? She always thought that her father admired Qi Xianqing too much and deified him on purpose. "Father, you are the headmaster of the Muyang school and the famous Ning Yunji in the Qinghe province. I don't care what you said. Don't spread it out and ruin the reputation of the school." The old master could only sigh in his heart and said nothing. At this moment, Su Li walked out of the tea house and immediately got lost. It was the first time for her to come to the Muyang school. After a class, she was called to the tea house by Ning Yunji. She had no time to be familiar with the terrain. "Su Li, what are you looking for?" When Su Li was confused, she heard a crisp voice behind her. She looked back and found that it was Mei Ruhan, who was the only one who had passed the test of character C before. "It turns out to be you, Mei Ruhan. I can't find the way." Su Li smiled sweetly and said in a gentle tone. Mei Ruhan blushed and was shy. Her voice was lower. "My maid went to ask for the key of the yard. I will take you there." Then, Mei Ruhan walked in front to lead the way. She looked back at Su Li from time to time. Seeing Su Li's gentle smile, she unconsciously relaxed. They chatted for a while and got closer to each other. "By the way, Ruhan, is the condition of the Muyang school so good?" He actually gave everyone a side house. "Of course not." Mei Ruhan quickly waved her hand and said, "If you want to live in a yard, you have to pay extra money. I don't know how much it is per month. Didn't your family tell you?" Su Li narrowed her eyes and said in a normal tone, "No, let's go and have a look." Mei Ruhan's beautiful eyes flashed a trace of doubt. She was smart and had already thought of something. But with Su Li's talent, the condition of her family should not be too bad. It should be known that ordinary families could not afford to hire a teacher. Soon, they came to a house with blue tiles. Su Li saw at a glance that Suzy Pei got a key from the steward in the house. "Miss, why are you here?" A lively and cute little servant girl in a light yellow dress skipped over to the two of them with the key in her hand. "Miss, I've got the key. Let's go." Seeing the little maid's lively appearance, Su Li knew that Mei Ruhan must treat her very well at ordinary times. She didn't look like a servant at all. "Gua, wait a minute. Let me go in and ask if there is Su Li's key." Mei Ruhan took Gua and was about to go inside. Su Li walked in front of her and stopped her. She shook her head in the latter's puzzled eyes. "Hey, my dear second sister, why do you come here?" Suzy Pei walked out of the door with a smile and shook the key in her hand. Her heart was full of resentment. She didn't expect that. Su Li's courage grew after just a few months. She made a fool of herself in the first class and fell into the Gue class, which was only attended by 4- or 5-year-old children. It was a great shame. Suzy Pei, who had always bullied Su Li, couldn't bear it. She wanted to retaliate immediately. But when she thought of her grandma's plan, she forcibly suppressed her resentment and pretended that nothing had happened. Mei Ruhan looked at Suzy Pei and Su Li in surprise. She only guessed that there was a grudge between them, but she didn't expect that they were sisters. Su Li didn't have the key to the yard, but Suzy Pei, who had the worst performance, got it. Were the elders of the Su family stupid? Mei Ruhan looked at Suzy Pei with disgust. She took Su Li's hand and said, "Su Li, why don't you live with me? The yard is spacious, and it's too lonely for 2 people to live. I can also ask you for advice." Suzy Pei was immediately angry, but there were so many people here, so she couldn't lose her temper. She could only suppress her anger and said proudly, "Su Area, my mother said that you should live with me. You are not allowed to live in her yard." Mei Ruhan stopped. It turned out that the 2 sisters lived in the same yard. It seemed that she thought too much. She was about to release Su Li's hand, but she heard Su Li's magnetic voice. "Sister Ruhan, let's go." "What?" Mei Ruhan was stunned for a moment, and then she was happy. She took Su Li and ran away. She was extremely obsessed with learning. The teacher invited by her family was a little useful at the beginning. Later, she gradually learned more and more, but she couldn't learn anything at all. She had no choice but to come to the Muyang school. She didn't expect that there was such a knowledgeable person among her peers. She naturally wanted to seize the opportunity to learn. Su Zipei foolishly watched Mei Ruhan and the other two leave. She was confused and at a loss. Su Li didn't even listen to her mother. The location of the yard rented by Mei Ruhan was excellent. It was only a few hundred meters away from the school, and the terrain was high. You could see the whole picture of the Muyang school from the second floor. A high wall could be seen in the distance. Mei Ruhan said that the boys' school was on the other side of the wall. Miss Su Li, you don't know that the Muyang school is shady. Gua, the little maid, looked around and stuck out her tongue. She said, the rent of the yard depends on the geographical location. The monthly rent varies from 100 taels to thousands of taels. The location rented by our miss is the best, and it costs 3,000 taels a month. Su Li was surprised. It seemed that Mei Ruhan had a high status in the family. Otherwise, even the merchants would not be willing to pay the rent of 3,000 taels a month. Gua, don't talk so much, Mei Ruhan scolded. She roughly knew Su Li's situation and was afraid to cause Su Li's discomfort. By the way, Su Li, Mei Ruhan hesitated and asked, your sister wants to live in the yard with you. Why don't you go? Mei Ruhan suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. She waved her hand and said, I just asked casually. If you don't want to answer, forget it. It doesn't matter. Su Li smiled lightly and said, if I agree, I will only be waiting for the woodshed. Although I don't care about being poor, I don't want to be uncomfortable. That's it. Mei Ruhan covered her mouth in surprise and said, how can your Su family be like this? If there is a person like you in my family, you will definitely be regarded as the pearl in the palm and be cultivated with all efforts. Don't your parents care about you? Maybe. Who knows? Su Li's answer was ambiguous, which made Mei Ruhan feel more sad. Compared with Su Li, her troubles seemed to be insignificant. Let's not talk about this. I see that you have been curious about the dictionary of Dahan. I will lend it to you. You can return it to me when I leave. How about that? Really? Su Li, you are so nice. Laughter like silver bells sounded in the yard. It spread into the forest and drifted far away. Su Zipei stood in the yard thousands of meters away from the yard. Looking at the messy weeds, she wanted to put the hoe in her hand directly on Su Li's head. Chapter 67. The Mei family prepared a lot of belongings for Mei Ruhan, including several beddings and sheets. After Gua cleaned up the house for her miss, she also came to help Su Li. The three of them worked together and finally cleaned up the yard before dark. Li, I didn't expect you to work so quickly. After a day, Mei Ruhan called Gua more casually. She wiped the sweat on her face and encouraged herself. It seems that I have to be more independent in the future. Oh, miss. Gua suddenly became anxious. How can you do this kind of dirty and tiring work? Let me do it. I can only do this. If you even learn this, I will be driven out of the Mrs. family. Gua's serious expression immediately made Su Li and Mei Ruhan laugh. Su Li thought that if there was such a quirky little girl beside her, maybe her life would be much more interesting. Hearing their laughter, Gua also giggled foolishly. Suddenly, she remembered something and said to Su Li mysteriously, Miss Su, you don't know. I heard that your younger sister lives in a yard more than 1 mile away from the college. The monthly rent is only 200 taels. If you don't want to be late for class, you have to get up very early to catch up. Su Li was not surprised when she heard that. Zhu Yin doted on Su Zipei very much, but her money was almost spent. She couldn't afford to live in a courtyard with a good location. Maybe Su Zipei begged for this courtyard. In the evening, the three of them had dinner and rested separately. Many things happened during the day, and Mei Ruhan and Gua were very tired. Su Li had an inborn body, so it didn't matter if she didn't sleep for several days and nights. She meditated and breathed all night and woke up on time in the morning. After getting up and washing, she went to the kitchen to cook a pot of corn porridge of suitable thickness. Then she mixed the fillings with local materials and made 3 crispy sesame cakes. With the seasonings she brought, the fragrance of the sesame cakes immediately rose to a whole level. It smells so good. Gua stretched and got up. Before she went to the kitchen, she sniffed hard. She couldn't help showing an intoxicated expression. Her soul was almost taken away. Gua, what did you make for breakfast today? It smells so good. Mei Ruhan walked out of the room without putting on her clothes. Her eyes sparkled like a little glutton. Gua shook her head and said, Miss, the sky is still dark, and I just got up. How could I make breakfast? I see. Mei Ruhan looked disappointed. It seems that the fragrance came from the yard next door. I didn't expect it to come here. Gua nodded in agreement. If it were not for the fact that they were not familiar with each other, she really wanted to go next door and ask for some breakfast. Miss, you can sleep a little longer. Gua is going to make breakfast. As Gua spoke, she opened the door of the kitchen. Instantly, she was overwhelmed by a stronger fragrance. She stared at the vague figure in the steaming kitchen and screamed out of fear. Mei Ruhan was scared and rushed out of the room. She grasped Gua's hand tightly and said in panic, What's wrong, Gua? Don't scare me. She was only 16 years old, and it was the first time for her to go out. She was already frightened, so she was naturally frightened by Gua's cry. Gua grabbed Mei Ruhan's hand and pointed to the kitchen, saying incoherently, Miss, look, it's our kitchen. It's our kitchen. As she spoke, a strand of crystal-clear liquid hung from the corner of her mouth. It smelled so good. I really want to eat it. At this time, Suli came out of the kitchen. Seeing Mei Ruhan, she was stunned and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, Why are you standing here? Mei Ruhan looked over Suli and wanted to see the scene in the kitchen. She held back her saliva and asked, Li, can you cook? What did you cook? Why does it smell so good? Hearing that, Suli smiled sweetly and said, I live here. How can I not show my gratitude at all? I happen to know how to cook. Don't blame me for acting on my own. No. Before Mei Ruhan said anything, Gua shouted, Gua and Miss are so happy. Gua has never tasted such a fragrant breakfast in my life. It must be delicious. My young miss is the most gluttonous. Gua. Hearing Gua's words, Mei Ruhan blushed and pretended to be angry. Suli couldn't help laughing and said hurriedly, Since you are awake, wash up and eat, in case it doesn't taste good when it's cold. When the two little girls heard this, they immediately nodded in unison, turned around, and ran back to their rooms. Miss, slow down. I will help you wash up later. No, I can do it myself. Standing in front of the kitchen, Suli felt strange. This feeling. Why did she feel like raising two pets? However, the appearance of these two girls made her feel a little more at ease, which she had been suppressing for a long time. After a while, Mei Ruhan and Gua finished washing up. Suli put the breakfast on the table. One sesame seed cake for each of them was just right. After serving corn porridge to them, Gua stepped aside and secretly swallowed her saliva. Servants had servants' rules. She had to wait for Suli and Mei Ruhan to finish eating before she went to eat. Seeing that, Mei Ruhan smiled and served another bowl of corn porridge. She snorted and said, Come here. This is not my home. There are so many rules. Hearing that, Gua was happy, but she still didn't dare to come over. Rules were rules. Suli was also a miss of the family. Without her permission, how could she dare to sit at the same table? Suli was stunned, and then shook her head and laughed. She waved her hand in Mei Ruhan's expectant eyes and said softly, Come and sit down. I have never regarded you as a servant, little Gua. Hearing that, Gua-er's eyes became warm and she almost shed tears. Even the young miss didn't say such words to her. Suli slightly pursed her lips. This situation was very similar, but her situation was different from Gua's. In the previous life, she was a miss of the Su family, but she couldn't eat at the same table with her parents. No one treated her like Gua. Gua sat down and wiped her hands. She picked up the sesame seed cake and took a bite. It made a crisp sound. The shrimp seed filling wrapped in refined salt, mixed with the fragrance of coarse grain. It burst on the tip of the tongue and became indescribable sweetness. Mei Ruhan stared at the sesame seed cake in her hand. It looked almost the same as the one sold outside. How could Suli make it so delicious? Gua almost bit her tongue. She had never eaten any delicious food. She didn't even eat much of the ordinary sesame seed cake sold in the town. Eating such delicious food at once, she was so happy that she wanted to cry. God. Oh no. Miss Suli was so kind to her. After taking a bite of the sesame seed cake and drinking a mouthful of the moderately hot corn porridge, Mei Ruhan felt as if all her pores had been opened by this simple breakfast. She woke up from the tiredness in the morning and became full of vigor. Li, the food you make is so delicious. If you can't be a female official in the future, you can definitely make a lot of money by opening a restaurant. Mei Ruhan's eyes were full of little stars of worship. However, I believe that with your talent, it will be easy for you to be an official if you participate in the cultural competition. Suli shook her head and said, "It's not so easy. Don't say it. It's almost time for class. Let's go." Mei Ruhan screamed and found that it was almost 7 o'clock in the morning. She and Suli hurriedly took the books and ran out of the yard, leaving Gua to look after the house. After getting along with Suli for a day, Mei Ruhan's eyes changed a lot. As long as she was with Suli, she would feel very at ease. She was 1 year older than Suli, but why was she more like a child in front of Suli? Mei Ruhan was amazed in her heart. There was always someone better than her. Compared with Suli, her excellence seemed to be overshadowed. She had to work harder. The first class in the morning was literature. Suli and Mei Ruhan separated and came to the gate of Class A. When Ning Yunji saw her, he immediately showed a kind smile and said, "You are here. Hurry up and find a place to sit down." Ning Yunji's performance immediately made many surprised eyes fall on Suli, but no one asked questions. They restrained their thoughts and resumed to review their lessons. Suli sat down and took out the dictionary of Dahan to review. When Ning Yunji saw this scene, he couldn't help but nod slightly. Although the Class A led by him couldn't be compared with Suli, each of them also stood out after going through many tests. It could be said that every miss from aristocratic family who could sit here was an outstanding woman with good character and appearance. It was not impossible for them to embark on an official career and bring honor to their ancestors in the future. After the morning reading, Ning Yunji began to teach. He was young and had rich experience. Every time he talked about something wonderful, he could always quote from other sources. The students were fascinated. Even Suli also learned something. When Suli was listening carefully, Ning Yunji was also observing her secretly. After the class, he appreciated Suli more. She had such achievements in learning at such a young age, but she was not arrogant or rash. She still worked very hard. Such a temperament couldn't be compared with ordinary people. The master really had a good vision. After the first class, Ning Yunji left directly and didn't talk to Suli, so as not to annoy others. As soon as he left, many classmates immediately came up to inquire about the situation. Suli dealt with them with ease and then turned away to go to the teacher of the second class, leaving a group of misses secretly praising her. Suli looked only 15 or 16 years old, but her ability to deal with people was very shrewd. They tried to coax her for a long time, but they didn't get any useful information. Following the information on the wooden sign, Suli found the classroom of the second class. When she entered the door, she saw dozens of rusted tables. The second class was embroidery. Although a few women in the Dahan country entered the imperial court and a few became generals to fight for the country, most women were still the vassals of men. After they married their husbands, they took the responsibility of supporting their husbands and educating their children. Therefore, the skill of female worker was essential. If a woman could master embroidery well, she could also reduce the economic burden of her husband's family. Suli glanced at the people present and saw Suzy Pei and Mei Ruhan at a glance. The students were divided into different classes, but the embroidery was not affected. At this moment, the people sitting together to listen to the class were still a group of people who entered the school with her. Suli sat down. After a while, a thin and tall lady came in from the door. The lady had high cheekbones, thin lips, and a pair of thin and long eyebrows. Although her makeup was delicate, she gave people an extremely mean feeling. "I am your female morality teacher and embroidery teacher." The woman's voice was as sharp as her appearance. "You can call me Lecturer Chui or Mrs. Yang. But, personally, I prefer to hear you call me Mrs. Yang." As she said that, Madame Young revealed a proud look. Several local misses in the room heard the words, and their faces changed slightly. There was only one famous Young family in the Muyang town. Lecturer Chui could enter that family. It was really something to be proud of. But such blatant showing off exposed Mrs. Yang's inferiority complex and shallow personality. Could such a vulgar woman really be their teacher? For a moment, many people doubted. Mrs. Yang didn't notice their thoughts. When she saw the faces of those misses changed, she was more complacent. Then she began to teach. Only her voice was left in the class. After a quarter of an hour, the contempt on the faces of many misses disappeared. Mrs. Yang could enter the Muyang school as a lecturer. Her knowledge of embroidery was really admirable. The Han embroidery of the Dahan country was described vividly by her. Although the young ladies of the various families practiced Han embroidery at home, they didn't know much about the system. Mrs. Yang talked about the history of Han embroidery and the techniques of Han embroidery, which made up for their shortcomings. After the brief introduction, most of the class time had passed. Mrs. Yang took a breath. The students thought she would continue, but she changed the topic and asked, Chapter 68. The sudden shout caused the entire room to instantly descend into silence. Many people's gazes swept in unison towards the third seat on the right of the teacher's table. Suli stood up slowly and respectfully. She replied, "I'm here. Are you Suli from the Desu town?" Madame Yang looked at Suli's appearance and figure. A hint of jealousy flashed in her eyes. Then she nodded seriously and said, "You do have some capital? It's no wonder that men in the Desu town flock to you as soon as you show up in public." Madame Yang's words were normal, but when others heard it, they immediately misunderstood. Others looked at Suli with a faint disgust. Even Mei Ruhan felt strange. However, she didn't doubt Suli. Although they only got along for a day, Suli's indifferent temperament left a deep impression on her. How could she be the kind of woman that Madame Yang said? Suli turns out to be that kind of woman who likes to seduce men? We actually become her classmates. It's shameful. Are the people of the Muyang school blind? How can they let this kind of person in? If Madame Yang didn't mention it, we would still be kept in the dark. For a time, there was a lot of discussion in the room, and it gradually became more and more intense. Madame Yang slightly raised the corner of her mouth. It was ridiculous that her aunt gave her so many benefits to deal with such a child. The girl was obviously so angry that she couldn't even speak. If she stimulated the little bitch with a few more words, she would lose her mind and collide with her in the class. Then she could push the boat with the current and directly fulfill her aunt's order. But at this moment, Suli's clear voice sounded and completely overwhelmed other people's voices. "Lecturer Chui, I don't know why you insult my innocence. I am from the Desu town, and Lecturer Chui is from the Muyang town. Does Lecturer Chui convict me only based on her slander? In my opinion, it's too stupid." Suli's tone was very calm, and she argued for what was right. She didn't have any awareness of being involved in the situation. Such a cold reply also woke up many of the young ladies who had been bewitched. Suli is right. Madame Yang is from the Muyang town, which is far away from the Desu town. How could she know what happened in the Desu town? That's too much. Isn't he afraid of being slandered by just hearing it and talking about it openly? Madame Yang is too careless. This kind of behavior is really hard to believe. In an instant, the direction of the wind changed. Madame Yang heard the discussion below the stage, and her face suddenly became a little ugly. Suli seemed to be not as easy to deal with as she thought, and she just called her Lecturer Chui 3 times? This was a blatant provocation. Mrs. Yang laughed coldly in her heart. Very good. There was still a long way to go. She had enough patience to find the girl's weakness, and then she would be able to find the right remedy. Thinking of this, Madame Yang looked a little relaxed and said lightly, "Suli, what you said is reasonable. I am being rude. Sit down." Suzy Pei, who was watching the show, was dumbfounded. Why did her aunt suddenly give in when she had the upper hand? She wanted to see her aunt help her vent her anger. Suli sat down and frowned secretly. Madame Yang was malicious to her. It was 80% that, ma'am. Su Chui made trouble for her. She took the opportunity to make trouble for her. Although she coped with it, her forbearance was somewhat beyond her expectation. This is troublesome. The second half of the class passed peacefully, but Mei Ruhan always felt that there were dark waves under the calm surface, which made her unconsciously frightened. After the class, Mei Ruhan took Suli back to the yard and couldn't help but snort. Madame Young doesn't seem to be a good person. She slandered you as soon as she came up. Have you ever offended her before? Suli shook her head and smiled bitterly. I don't know. But, in order not to get you into trouble, I'd better move away. Don't go. Mei Ruhan suddenly became angry and took Su Li's hand angrily. You can live here peacefully. I am not afraid of Monkey Young at all. I also want to eat the dishes you cook. Monkey Young? Su Li was surprised and then chuckled. Now that you mention it, I really think that Madame Young looks like a monkey. She didn't mention the matter of moving away anymore. With the power in her hands now, it was more than enough to protect Mei Ruhan. Ha ha ha, right? I have long wanted to say that. Mei Ruhan also laughed happily. Guo came out with a puzzled look and looked at the two. What kind of monkey could make the two misses laugh like this? After the morning class on the third day, the first class was embroidery. Su Li sat quietly in her seat and saw Ma'am Yang Chui soon. Today, ma'am. Yang Chui wore a long dress. Her whole body was covered with unrestrained and enthusiastic patterns, which had a unique, exotic style. This kind of pattern could hardly be seen in Dahan country. Today, I will teach you the most characteristic needlework of Han embroidery. You must have learned the basic needlework at home. I will skip it and teach you what you want to learn most. Ma'am. Yang Chui looked as usual, but Su Li still saw that she glanced at her quietly several times. First of all, embroider the cloud pattern of Han embroidery as wide as one finger. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone immediately opened the needlework box at the table. When Su Li was about to open it, she suddenly raised her head and met Madame Yang's expectant eyes. She immediately stopped what she was doing. Madame Yang was ashamed and annoyed because of being seen. She immediately walked to Su Li and scolded. What are you doing? Why are you so slow? Don't you start? Don't you even know the basic needlework? If that's the case, then why are you still sitting here? Get out of here. Su Li pursed her lips and reached out to open the needlework box quickly. Ma'am. Yang Chui immediately stepped aside as a conditioned reflex. But she didn't hear Su Li's panicked cry for a long time. What happened? She looked back in astonishment and saw that Su Li was safe and sound. She was taking out a needle from the box. Was the mechanism broken? At this time, Su Li slowly stood up with a shy face and said in a low voice, Madame Yang, I have to go to the toilet. Can I leave for a while? Madame Yang snorted and said, Go. Come back quickly. Su Li immediately left the room as if she had been granted amnesty. Madame Yang saw her go out of the room, and her doubts immediately appeared on her face. She pretended to walk to Su Li's table naturally and gently picked up the needlework box. Before she reached out to open it, she saw that the lid of the box suddenly popped up. Ah! An earth-shattering scream pierced through the shabby room. Su Li, who had walked far away, heard it clearly. She couldn't help but smile. Estimating the time, Su Li returned to the room but didn't see Ma'am Yang Chui. She didn't look for it. She sat down quietly and opened the needlework box again. Then she threaded the needle and began to embroider the cloud pattern. At her age in the previous life, she didn't even hold the embroidery needle. Later, after she married her disabled husband, she went to the embroidery workshop as an apprentice in order to make a living for her family. She did the chores for free in the embroidery workshop. Of course, the embroidery workshop was very happy. Her disabled husband was very weak. In order to buy better medicinal materials to stew medicine for him, she almost didn't sleep. She practiced embroidery every day, and her hands were full of needle marks. After 2 months, she made up for her lack of talent with diligence. Her embroidery skills were not worse than those of the embroidery artificers in the workshop. Her diligence was appreciated by the workshop owner. She learned the unique stitch method of Han embroidery from the workshop owner, string flower stitch. It didn't take long for her to complete a flower feast. With this picture, She became the top embroidery artificer in the workshop. Her poor life was greatly improved, and she had more time to accompany her disabled husband. Thinking of the past, Suli smiled gently. She unconsciously sped up her hands and fluttered on the embroidery board like a butterfly. In a short time, there was a long cloud pattern on the blank cloth, like the clouds floating in the sky. It was extremely flexible. Ma'am, Yang Shui wiped the water on her face angrily. She did something in the needlework box. As long as Suli opened it, she would be sprayed with black ink immediately and make a fool of herself on the spot. But she didn't expect that it didn't matter if Suli opened it. She just picked it up and the mechanism opened automatically. She was so unlucky. The cold wind blew into the room. Ma'am. Yang Shui couldn't help but shake her neck. She just washed her face with a lot of cold water. It was really uncomfortable. Counting the time, ma'am. Yang Shui had no time to change her clothes inside. She could only change her coat and hurried back to the classroom. As soon as Madame Yang appeared, everyone immediately looked up. They all saw the miserable situation of the teacher just now. Some of them even couldn't help laughing. Fortunately, ma'am, Yang Shui screamed and rushed out at that time, so they didn't see who was laughing. Otherwise, they would definitely settle accounts later. Stepping into the room, Madame Yang's cold eyes swept across the classroom. Everyone hurriedly lowered their heads. Only Su Li still sat upright and didn't flinch at all. Seeing Su Li's stubborn appearance, Madame Yang suddenly felt angry. She walked quickly to Su Li and scolded. Who allowed you to leave the classroom at will? If the cloud pattern is not finished, everyone will be. Halfway through her words, Madame Yang was like a duck whose throat was choked. She stared at Su Li's embroidery board blankly. Even her eyeballs almost popped out. What she saw was the cloud pattern that was 1 foot long. Su Li embroidered so much in just a quarter of an hour? Only the top embroidery artificer of the embroidery workshop could have this kind of speed. How old was Su Li? How could she do it? She must have cheated. Thinking of this, Madame Yang immediately confirmed that she guessed right. She sneered and screamed, Su Li, stand up. Su Li put down the embroidery needle and stood up. She still looked calm. What's wrong? Lecturer Chui, do you want to hear hearsay again this time? As soon as she said this, there was a burst of slight laughter in the room. Madame Yang's face instantly turned red. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She pointed at the cloud pattern with her fingertips and almost broke the embroidery board. Embroidering 1 foot long cloud pattern in just a quarter of an hour. Do you think that your embroidery skill is comparable to that of the top embroidery artificer? If you want to cheat, do it secretly. Don't think that everyone is as stupid as you. Chapter 69. Lecturer Chui. Su Li raised her tone slightly, which made the former's heart tremble, and then he became furious. Don't think that everyone is as ignorant as you. However, Lecturer Chui is content in a corner and has no fighting spirit. It is understandable that he is short-sighted. What did you say? I'm ignorant? Madame Yang screamed and wanted to tear Su Li's face. I am the embroidery artificer of the embroidery workshop in Muyang Town. Even the workshop master praised me for having the chance to inherit her skills and become the next workshop master. My grasp of the skipping needle is only below the owner's. You're only 15 years old. The amount of food you've eaten is less than the amount of salt I've eaten. How dare you say that I'm ignorant? Mistress Yang said all this in one breath, and the faces of the ladies in the room changed slightly. It was not easy to work in the embroidery workshop. There was only one government embroidery workshop in each town, and the embroidery artificers of the embroidery workshop were the best embroidery artists in the whole town. Madame Yang was actually from the embroidery workshop, which made many young ladies look at her with new eyes. Maybe she could marry into the Yang family mostly because of her identity as an embroidery artificer. However, there was also one person who had a strange look in his eyes. Mei Ruhan looked at Su Li with curiosity, surprise, and increasingly strong worship in her eyes. She was the only one who saw the whole process of Su Li's embroidery. Su Li was not only good at reading but also a top embroidery artificer. After hearing a series of glorious deeds of Madame Yang, Suli smiled slightly and said calmly, "Since Lecturer Chui doesn't believe me, how about competing with me? Let's see who can do it faster." Madame Yang's head heated up, and she was about to agree. Suddenly, she quivered and regained her composure. The little bitch was so calm. She must have something to rely on. If she really lost to Suli in front of all the students, wouldn't she be too ashamed to stay in the Muyang school? Looking at Madame Yang's changing expression, Suli frowned slightly and continued to say, "Madame Yang, as the embroiderer young of the Muyang town, you dare not to compete with a student?" This little slut's mouth was really poisonous. Mrs. Yang was so angry that her face was ashen. Her internal organs were all tangled together. Her mind raced. Suddenly, her brows relaxed and she said in a cold and disdainful voice, "Compete with you in embroidery? You're not qualified. But, in order to make you admit your mistake, I will compete with you in terms of embroidery knowledge. If I lose, I will admit that your embroidery skills are indeed not bad. If you lose, get out of the Muyang school. The Muyang girls' school does not teach misbehaving girls." As soon as he said this, there was a series of gasps in the room. Shameless. Too shameless. Mei Ruhan flushed with anger. She stood up and shouted, "Lecturer Chui, aren't you bullying me? Suli is only 15 years old, and you are more than twice her age. Of course, you are more knowledgeable. It is not fair at all." "That's right, Madame Yang. Let's change to another competition." Mei Ruhan's words immediately aroused a burst of agreement. Although the teenage girls had their own thoughts, they were still simple and willing to believe that justice existed in the world. "Shut up." Madame Yang turned around and shouted sternly, terrifying everyone to the point their beautiful faces went pale and they kept quiet out of fear. Mei Ruhan's face was pale, but she still plucked up her courage and shouted, "Mrs. Yang, you are too shameless. If Suli loses, I will quit the school with her. I don't want to stay in such a school." Suli was stunned. Her eyes skipped over Madame Yang and fell on the petite figure, who was still slightly trembling but firm and unyielding. She didn't expect that the girl seemed to be soft-tempered, but she was also hot-tempered. When Madame Yang heard Mei Ruhan's words, she almost went mad. She targeted Suli, but she didn't expect that someone would jump out to meddle in other people's business. The Mei family was also a big family, and Mei Ruhan was the pearl of the family. Madame Yang didn't want to offend her, so she could only persuade her, "Miss Mei, don't be deceived by Suli's hypocrisy. She can cheat in embroidery, so she can disguise her character. Moreover, Suli also said that there is always someone better than you in the world. Since she regards herself as an outsider, why can't I compete with her to see more?" This remark sounded strange, but it was almost impeccable. Mei Ruhan held her breath for a long time and finally scolded bitterly, "Sophistry, vicious woman." Madame Yang's face darkened. She wanted to quibble a few more words, but there was a chuckle behind her. "Thanks to Lecturer Chui's appreciation, I will take this competition. However, I want to change the rules. If I lose, I will be driven out of the school. If Lecturer Chui loses, she only needs to praise me." Doesn't Lecturer Chui think that this rule setting is too shameless? Since she had fallen out with Madame Yang, Suli was ruthless and aggressive in her words. Madame Yang was happy when she heard that. Suli dared to agree. Her embroidery skills were not the best, but her insight in embroidery was absolutely the best. Even the workshop owner of the Muyang town couldn't compare with her. Suli dared to compete with her, so she was doomed. Okay. Madame Yang was afraid that Suli would regret, so she immediately changed the rules. "You and I are in different positions. It is unrealistic to ask me to bet with you. So, if I lose, I will stand at the highest point of the entire Muyang school and shout, 'Suli, I'm sorry,' 3 times. How about it?" Hearing that, others suddenly looked at each other with horror. If Madame Yang really lost, even if she would not be driven out of the school, her reputation would be ruined. It seems that Madame Yang is very confident. No matter the result, Suli will be famous after today. Suli should agree, right? Everyone looked at Suli, but the latter shook her head gently. "Nothing." Suli smiled lightly and said in a decisive tone, If you lose, you must kneel down and shout grandma 3 times and kowtow 3 times. If you agree, I will make the bet. Hiss. So cruel. So cruel. Madame Yang's face also turned pale. She was Su Li's great-aunt. If she kowtowed to Su Li and called her grandma, wouldn't the whole Chui family be ashamed? At this moment, classes in other classrooms had already ended, and more people gathered outside the classroom. Madame Yang had no way to back down. She glanced out of the window and gritted her teeth. Okay, I agree. Best of 3. I will not only test your embroidery, but also your girl's morality. The crowd was in an uproar again, and many people pointed at it. They didn't expect that Madame Yang would add such a shameless condition at this time, which really opened their eyes. Madame Yang turned a deaf ear and stared at Su Li. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. As long as she won, everything was negotiable. I agree. Su Li nodded indifferently. Mei Ruhan also covered her mouth and chuckled. It was really ridiculous for Madame Yang to compete with Su Li in terms of talent. Okay. As soon as Su Li agreed, Madame Yang immediately showed a smile of success. Then let me ask you, where did the embroidery on my clothes come from? What's the origin? If you can tell me 1, 2, 3, I will consider that you win. The implication was that if Su Li only said the name of the embroidery, she would lose. As soon as the question came out, people in the room and outside the door exclaimed in a low voice. It's too difficult. I have never seen this kind of pattern. Not only the name, but also the specific origin. It's too difficult. Mei Ruhan stared at Su Li. She had an inexplicable confidence in Su Li and always felt that this omnipotent girl could create miracles again. Even though she was knowledgeable, she didn't know the specific origin of the clothes worn by Madame Yang. Su Li glanced at Madame Yang's clothes and seemed to fall into some kind of memory. But Madame Yang was silent and couldn't speak. She looked sarcastic and sneered. Su Li, don't you boast that you are an outsider? Why don't you even know the name of the embroidery? Could it be that you were just bluffing and trying to scare me off? Muyang School is not a place that a fame-fishing student like you can insult. Pack up your things and get out of the school. Su Li shook her head and smiled slowly. Lecturer Chui, why are you in a hurry? Listen to me. This kind of embroidery is called Zhu embroidery. Zhu embroidery? Everyone was confused. What kind of embroidery method was that? They had never heard of it. Madame Yang's face suddenly turned pale. This wicked girl even recognized it. It was impossible. It must be a coincidence. With her knowledge, it was absolutely impossible for her to tell the specific origin. The change of Madame Yang's expression immediately let everyone know that Su Li was right. The reason why no one has seen this kind of embroidery is that it is not the embroidery of the Dahan country, Su Li said with fervor and assurance. The northeast border of the Dahan country is bordered by the Zhu Shogwa. The Zhu embroidery is the embroidery of the Zhu Shogwa. The Zhu Shogwa people are tough. 8 out of 10 people practice martial arts, and their characters are extremely cheerful. Therefore, the Zhu embroidery is also warm and unrestrained. With Su Li's popularization, the whole room was quiet. The whispers became smaller and smaller. Everyone listened quietly, as if they were listening to the lecturer's lecture. And this kind of embroidery is not something that ordinary women in the Zhu Shogwa are qualified to learn. Only those who practice martial arts to a certain level can bear the pull of the high-strength silk thread and pierce the special cloth. Therefore, the price of this kind of embroidery is much higher than that of the Han embroidery. It is extremely rare in the Dahan country. I think Madame Yang spent a lot to get this dress and show it to others. At this point, everyone couldn't help but roar with laughter. Madame Yang was stiff like a puppet. Her face turned blue and white. She wanted to find a hole to hide in. After she bought this dress, she had always been proud of it. But she didn't expect that Su Li would tear off her skin and reveal her bloody vanity. The sense of shame made her want to stab Su Li to death. The marine people living on the islands of the Donghai Sea are also tough. They are very keen on the Zhu embroidery. Their geographical conditions determine that they can't raise silkworms, so they can't make the Zhu embroidery. Most of the Zhu embroidery of the Zhu Shogwa is taken to the sea by merchants for sale. Few of the Zhu embroidery can be sold in the inland areas. So, It is normal that you don't know the Zhu embroidery. I also know it from some unconventional ancient books. Suli continued and slowly moved her eyes to the face of Madame Yang. Lecturer Chui, do you have anything to add? If you can add one more sentence, I will lose. How about that? After this sentence was said, there was another burst of laughter. It was more wanton than the suppressed laughter just now. Madame Yang was expressionless. She wanted to find another sentence to add, but no matter how hard she racked her brains, she couldn't add any more. What she knew was that the Zhu embroidery came from the Zhuxiu country, and few people could master the Zhu embroidery. She didn't even know why few people could master the Zhu embroidery. She had never heard of the islands of the Donghai. Zhu embroidery. Before Madame Yang spoke, she was interrupted by Mei Ruhan, who laughed wildly. Lecturer Chui, don't lie. Although there are not many embroidery artificers in the Zhu Shogua country in the Dahan country, there must be some. It is not difficult to ask an embroidery artificer to confront you. If you lie, maybe you can't stay in the Yang family anymore. Madame Yang trembled slightly and hurriedly shut up. Obviously, she was guessed by Mei Ruhan. His actions caused many people to snicker. After today, Lecturer Yang's reputation was ruined. You win the first round. Madame Yang took a deep breath and said unwillingly, don't forget what I said before. I will lose only if you pass the test of women's ethics. I will give you a question now. If you can answer it, I will kowtow to you. How about that? Chapter 70. Madame Yang's second question stunned all the people present, because the answer to this question was too simple. As a heroine of the Dahan country, Mrs. Gu's words and deeds on the battlefield were recorded and then compiled into books. Anyone who had read books for a few years basically knew the answer. Did Madame Yang deliberately ask this question to give herself a way out? Many people had this idea. Only Suli clearly knew that ma'am. Yang Chui would never admit defeat so willingly. The war has been more than 30 years. Suli thought so and replied according to Madame Yang's idea. At that time, General Ling was plotted against by the enemy and was seriously injured. The whole war situation was supported by Mrs. Gu. Even so, Mrs. Gu never fell down. She even had time to send a letter home to ask whether the grandson of the Ling family, who was pregnant for 10 months at that time, had been born safely. After the war, it was regarded as a good story. After a brief introduction of the background, Suli smiled and said, although it is not clearly stated in the book, it is easy to guess that the letter was sent to the biological mother of the grandson of the Ling family, Madame Jiang Meng. Suli's answer made others couldn't help but secretly nod. This answer was impeccable, and there was no flaw at all. Even if they opened the book and read it, they couldn't answer more concisely than Suli. It's a pity that the grandson of the Ling family died on the battlefield at the age of 17. If he is still alive now, some people outside the door couldn't help sighing. Many people heard it with a heavy heart. All the members of the Ling family were loyal and brave. All 3 generations died on the battlefield. Madame Jiangming gave birth to 4 sons. The eldest son died on the battlefield. The 3rd son died prematurely. The 4th son accidentally ate poison and became disabled. Only the 2nd son still served in the army. Mrs. Gu died before her son. No one knew how much pain she had suffered that ordinary people couldn't. Madame Yang listened to the discussion and smiled gradually. Suli, I have to say that your answer is very good. Unfortunately, you forget that I am testing your female ethics. Your answer to Madame Jiangming is really wrong. Others were also confused. They thought the same as Suli. How could it be wrong? Suli raised her eyebrows and said, Lecturer Chui, what's your opinion? Tell me. Madame Yang looked calm and said slowly, everyone knows that the current Madame Jiangming is a first-rank titled lady bestowed by the imperial court. Her status was comparable to that of a high-ranking official, but 30 years ago, Madame Jiangming was just a talented girl from a humble family who had just married into the Ling family. Although she is talented and can crush her peers, she can't change the fact that she was born poor. Women's morals, women's morals. Men are the heavens, women are the earth. Only when men were at the top and women were at the bottom could they maintain the prosperity of a family. This was the unchanging principle of women's morality that had been passed down since ancient times. Jiang Ming has just married into the Ling family and is like a phoenix. She has to be cautious, docile, and please her husband. Everything should be based on her husband's decision. Mrs. Gu wrote a letter and sent it home. Although he was asking how his grandson was doing, it was impossible for him to be asking Jiang Ming. Even if Jiang Ming receives the letter and sees that the person written on the letter is me, she will immediately hand it over to my husband and let my husband make the decision. His words silenced the crowd. Madame Yang thought that everyone was shocked by her words and was filled with admiration. While he was secretly complacent, he suddenly heard Su Li began to clap. Wonderful. What lecturer Chui said is really wonderful. Madame Yang didn't expect that the first person to praise her was Su Li. She couldn't help but sneer. Su Li, even if you admit defeat now, I won't give you a way out. You still have to drop out of school. No? Lecturer Chui, you are wrong. Su Li's smile gradually became cold. You can twist women's morality to such an extent. I am ashamed of myself and can only say that it is wonderful. I think Lecturer Chui has always done this. It must be very hard for you to live like a slave in the Yang family, right? Su Li's ridicule immediately led to a louder laughter. At this moment, everyone looked at Madame Yang with full disgust. They were really disgusted by Madame Yang's words just now. Su Li. Madame Yang was repeatedly ridiculed. She couldn't help but scream out of exasperation. You lose, you lose. Everything I said is the essence of women's morality. It is not wrong at all. If you don't believe it, it means you don't believe in the foundation of the country. You want to rebel against the women's morality of the entire Dahan country. Do you want to be executed for treason? Su Li smiled indifferently, madam. What you said is the foundation of the country. You think too highly of yourself. Your seemingly perfect remarks are actually full of loopholes and can't stand scrutiny at all. You said that men are superior and women are inferior. Everything at home and outside is decided by men. Let me ask you. At that time, General Ling Jinglei was seriously injured and in a coma. He couldn't speak. Did Mrs. Gu have to stay with him all the time and do nothing but let him be defeated? Su Li's words hit Madame Yang's heart like a heavy hammer. Her face turned pale, and she was speechless for a long time. Let me ask you again. Su Li's eyes were burning. She took a step forward. Madame Yang was immediately scared and couldn't help but step back a few steps. It is also the Ling family. Almost all the men of the older generation of the Ling family died on the battlefield. Now it is the 70-year-old Mrs. Gu and Madame Jiang Ming who manage the family. According to your words, do Mrs. Gu and Madame Jiang Ming have to commit suicide and follow their husbands? Let the Ling family perish? Men's merits are merits? Everything a woman does becomes a man's credit? They can't even have freedom and dignity? Su Li's voice became louder and louder, ma'am. Yang Chui, I don't know why you have such an absurd idea. You are a woman, but you are willing to be inferior and even proud of it. It is really an eye-opener for me. Our Dahan country has a lecturer like you. It is really misleading. With the last sentence, Madame Yang's face was pale. She was paralyzed and fell to the ground. Good. Su Li, you are so great. Oh my God. These words make me want to cry. All the female students stood up excitedly. Something called hot blood passed through their hearts. They couldn't help but cheer and applaud for Su Li. Madame Yang's words were really suffocating. It was really refreshing that Su Li could hit the nail on the head. Rebellious. You students are all rebellious. Madame Yang got up with red eyes. She pointed at everyone and shouted, but no one paid attention to her. Such a response almost drove her crazy, but then a wave of fear swept over her, almost drowning her. Could it be that she had been wrong all the time? Madame Yang looked at Su Li, who was smiling in the crowd. She seemed to see a devil. She was stunned for a moment and suddenly screamed in horror. Then she fled from the classroom in a hurry. The classroom was quiet for a moment and then burst into more enthusiastic cheers. Su Li won. Su Li won, Lecturer Chui. Great. I really want to see Lecturer Chue kneel down and call her grandma. Ha ha ha. She is so shameless. She is not worthy of sympathy at all. Su Zipei stood in the middle of people in a daze. She seemed to see everyone leaving her and walking to Su Li. She was still in a daze. How could Su Li, who had only attended school for 1 year, be so powerful? Su Li was surrounded in the middle at the moment, and there were many people from other classes. Su Li, I think it is better for you to teach the women's ethics class. Yes, yes. It is much more interesting than Madame Yang. Mei Ruhan was also like a little fangirl. She stood next to Su Li and blinked her eyes. She suggested, Su Li, you just criticized Madame Yang. We also think she is wrong, but we don't know to what extent the real women's ethics should be. Why don't you tell us now? Mei Ruhan's proposal immediately got everyone's approval. Su Li smiled helplessly. She was surrounded in the middle and could not get away. She could only roughly talk about her understanding. After the morning, the matter of Su Li and Madame Yang immediately spread throughout the Muyang girls' school. Even the boys' school heard about it. After this matter, Su Li became the most prestigious person in the entire Muyang girls' school. When Ning Yunji heard the news, he asked someone to know the details and suddenly laughed. The last disciple of the master is really amazing. Dad, don't laugh. Ning Qing rolled her eyes angrily and said, Ma'am, Su Chui is indeed not a good lecturer. But if the Yang family makes trouble, how should we deal with it? Ning Yunji heard it and suddenly became serious. He said, Isn't it because of what you did? Ning Qing looked aggrieved and said, If the Yang family didn't help us at that time, how could the Muyang school be built today? Dad, didn't you agree at that time? Why do you blame me now? Ning Yunji's eyes softened and he sighed faintly. I would rather the Muyang school could not be built. I don't want the Yang family, a profit-seeking family, to put their hands into the school at will. The next day, Madame Yang really did not come to the school again. The whole Muyang school seemed to be ordinary, but it was full of tension everywhere. The embroidery class was changed to a new lecturer. Su Li attended the class honestly and didn't keep a high profile. As for the women's ethics class, Ning Qing personally taught it. She was the only daughter of Ning Yunji. Her knowledge and self-restraint were not comparable to that of Ma'am Yang Chui. After the class, Su Li thought that Ning Yunji would come back to find her, but she didn't receive the message. The mess she had made was neither big nor small. The Yang family was the overlord of the Muyang town. Ma'am Yang Chui would definitely speak ill of her after she went back. Even if it was just to maintain the face of the Yang family, they would not let her live well. After returning to the yard, Su Li sorted out her messy thoughts and discussed the meaning of the dictionary of Dahan with Mei Ruhan. After a while, Guo ran from the door in a panic and said, It's bad. Miss Li, I saw a group of old guys coming in from the gate of the school. They didn't wear the uniform of the Muyang school. They are probably the people of the Yang family. Mei Ruhan's expression changed slightly, and she looked at Su Li worriedly. But Su Li acted as if nothing had happened and continued to study the dictionary of Dahan. I hope nothing bad will happen. Mei Ruhan murmured and also put down her mind to study. With her personal ability, even if she was full of worries, she couldn't change the result. At this moment, in the tea house of the school, 6 futons were full, but no one spoke. Ning Qing served her father and poured a cup of tea for everyone. Ning Yunji immediately laughed heartily and said, Master of the Yang family, you are really a rare guest. Sitting in front of Ning Yunji, the old man with a somewhat sinister look snorted coldly and directly said, Your Muyang school must give our Yang family an explanation for this matter. Su Li must be driven out of the school. The conversation between the school and the Yang family lasted for a long time, and the content was confidential. As the sun set, the Yang family left in a hurry. Someone immediately found Su Li and passed the message. The Yang family left with a smile, but the face of the headmaster of the school was very gloomy. This news immediately made Mei Ruhan's heart sink. Before she responded, a manservant of the school came to the door and shouted, Who is Miss Su Li? Su Li put down the book and stood up calmly. I am. The manservant stood by the door and hesitated for a long time before he reluctantly handed a paper token to Suli. Miss Suli, don't be discouraged. The headmaster will not let you be wronged. The young family has gone too far. Chapter 71. The competition between Suli and Lecturer Chui has disturbed the environment of the school. Now Lecturer Chui and Suli are ordered to go home to recuperate and wait for the result. Just go home to recuperate. Mei Ruhan and Gua breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. It seems that the headmaster of the school has some backbone. Otherwise, according to the Yang family's attitude, you must be driven out. After Suli finished reading, the manservant immediately said, the headmaster has ordered that in order to prevent the Yang family from making trouble, a carriage will be arranged to escort you all the way home tonight. Suli nodded gently and said with a smile, the headmaster is really considerate. Suli is very grateful. The manservant's cheeks were slightly red and he scratched his head. Miss Su was really beautiful when she smiled. Unfortunately, such a talented and beautiful woman was coveted by a villain. That night, Suli only said goodbye to Mei Ruhan and Gua. Then she left with the dictionary of Dahan at night. The carriage moved very slowly at night. Suli didn't return to the byway building until the morning. Mammy Li was cleaning the room for Suli. Although Suli was not here, she would feel uncomfortable if she didn't clean the room for a day. Suddenly, Mammy Li heard a familiar footstep behind her. She was stunned and turned around. When she saw Suli, she immediately put down the broom in her hand and came forward with surprise. Miss, why do you come back so soon? How about the Muyang girls' school? Have you been wronged? You can take me there next time. Suli didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Mammy Li's series of questions. She stepped over Mammy Li and sat down to pour herself a cup of tea. She said, Mammy, I won't go to the school for the time being. If you want to go, you have to ask Zipei. Mammy Li's face changed slightly and she said nervously, what's wrong? What happened? Yes, I remember that when you left last time, you said that the Muyang girls' school was very busy at the beginning. Later, you had time to come back to see the byway building. Why did you come back after only 3 or 4 days? Suli shook her head and said nothing. It was complicated and couldn't be explained clearly in a few words. Soon, the news of Suli's return was known by the people of the byway building. Although everyone didn't understand why Suli came back so soon, they were very happy. Without Suli, the byway building seemed to have no backbone. Although it could still operate normally, they always felt uncomfortable. Miss, I have something to tell you. When Suli was about to deal with the orders of the precious beggar's chicken accumulated in the byway building, he sure stood up at this time and wanted to say something. There was a hint of guilt in his expression. Suli slightly twisted her eyes and said nothing. She turned around and walked to the empty balcony of the attic. Looking at Suli's back, he sure sighed deeply and walked up with heavy steps. Before Suli responded, she heard a plop sound behind her. She turned around in shock and found that he sure was kneeling in front of her. Miss, I'm sorry. He sure's tiger-like eyes flashed with tears, and he sighed. The Su family knows that I can cook the precious beggar's chicken. They asked me to be responsible for making the precious beggar's chicken and gave me an extra 10 taels of silver every month. Suli looked at Hishur expressionlessly. So you agreed? Hishur's breathing stagnated for a moment, and he said with difficulty, I really don't want to agree. But I still have a wife and a child. The whole family depends on me to survive. The old lady of the Su family said that if I didn't agree, she would report it to the government and say that I stole the recipes of the Su family and put me in prison. How dare I, a civilian, fight with the Su family? When Hishur said these words, he immediately felt a lot more relaxed. Miss, you can be considered as half a master to me. I said these words not to ask for your forgiveness, but because I feel sorry and don't know how to help you. I'm really useless. A man in his 30s knelt in front of a 15-year-old girl and cried worse than a child. Suli sighed softly. Tell me how you were exposed. Hishur stopped crying and intermittently told the ins and outs of the story. It turned out that during the days when Suli was away, The order of the precious beggar's chicken was very urgent. Ma'am, Su Chui came to the Byway building almost every day and pretended that the Byway building would go out of business if it couldn't make the precious beggar's chicken. Then she took the chief chefs of the Byway building and said how much she loved Su Li over and over again to refresh the good impression of the chief chefs. After 2 or 3 times, he sure was hooked as expected. Until he made the precious beggar's chicken, ma'am. Su Chui suddenly changed her face, and he knew that he was cheated. Su Li had a conclusion in her heart. Ma'am, Su Chui's plan was one ring after another, and it was only aimed at her. He sure was just a poor person who was implicated by her. Miss Bad News. The old lady came here with many mammies. Mammy Li went to the attic in a panic. When she saw he sure kneeling in front of Su Li, she was confused and at a loss. He sure immediately wiped his tears and stood up. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she went downstairs first. At this moment, it was dinner time, and the first floor was full of guests. It was very lively. Ma'am, Su Chui saw that Su Li came back, and she immediately felt happy. But she pretended to be angry and shouted, "You are an unfilial granddaughter. I am so angry." As she said, she walked to Su Li with a crutch and slapped her. Slap. A red palm print immediately appeared on Su Li's right face. She didn't hide, and she couldn't hide. The crisp sound resounded through the lobby. All the guests who were still eating immediately stopped and looked at her. What happened? That seems to be the old lady of the Su family. She actually slapped Miss Su Li? Miss Su Li's face is swollen. She is so cruel. When Ma'am Su Chui heard the conversation of the guests around her, she immediately grasped her heart and said angrily, "I worked hard to find a way to send you to the Muyang girls' school. But you were directly dropped out of school in less than 5 days. What a scandal! What a scandal!" Then Ma'am Su Chui waved her hand painfully and said, "It's okay that you are arrogant because of your little cooking skills at home, but you don't know how to restrain yourself in the Muyang girls' school. You have lost the face of our Su family. Get out. There is no daughter like you in the Su family." As soon as Ma'am Su Chui finished her words, a group of old mammies immediately acted and skillfully threw all the things in Su Li's room outside the gate of the Byway building. More and more people gathered in front of the Byway building and pointed at Su Li. Mammy Li stood aside. She felt wronged and distressed. She shed tears. Why was the life of the miss so bitter? Su Li looked indifferent. She walked to the front of the Byway building and squatted down to clean up. She turned over a piece of cloth, and a large number of unsightly and gaudy clothes rolled out. The onlookers snorted secretly and shyly turned their heads away. Su Li squinted her eyes and looked up to see Ma'am Su Chui's undisguised complacency. It was Zipei who came up with this trick. She was very satisfied. What are these? Mammy Li was scared out of her wits when she saw those ragged belly bands. She ran to wrap them up and said, "These are not our misses. It must be slander. It's her. It's all her doing. She has been displeased with the miss for a long time." Mammy Li pointed at Ma'am Su Chui and desperately defended. But it made the onlookers more disappointed and despised Su Li. The old lady of the Su family was highly respected. If Su Li's mammy wanted to clear the suspicion of her miss, she had to find a suitable target. "Why don't you believe it? Why don't you believe it?" Mammy Li burst into tears and almost went crazy. She said, "You don't know how much my miss has suffered and how she is in the Su family. But you all put on such a face. You are all villains." Everyone claimed to be righteous. Mammy Li's words immediately made many people angry. "What? You have done it. Why don't you allow me to say it?" "Tut-tut, I didn't expect that Miss Su Li is so unbearable. Bah, I misjudged you. I thought you were a good match for me. But I didn't expect that you are a slut who has been raped by thousands of men. You are pretending to be virtuous. It's disgusting." The malice was fermenting. The onlookers surrounded Su Li and said more vicious words. For a time, the Byway building became a denunciation meeting for Su Li. Crack. A rotten egg hit Su Li's head. The egg yolk flowed down along her hair, which immediately made Su Li stink. It's disgusting to pretend now. I will smash you to death. I also have some leftovers. Let's throw them together. Throw her to death. Su Li bowed her head and packed her luggage. She didn't avoid them and had nowhere to avoid them. Soon she was covered with leftovers and smelled worse than beggars. Mammy Li stood in front of Su Li, but she couldn't stop them. She cried so much that her eyes were blurred. But she didn't see that Su Li bowed her head and didn't shed a drop of tears. Suddenly, a huge stone flew from the crowd. Mammy Li's eyes widened, but she couldn't stop it. She watched it hit Su Li's forehead. Tick, tick. Blood immediately flowed down her cheeks. Seeing the blood, everyone's high-spirited mood was extinguished by ice water. Then they found that they had done too much. But now they wouldn't admit their mistakes. They just restrained themselves a little and stopped throwing things. Su Li's eyes were soon stained with blood. She touched her forehead. There was blood on her hand. Then she smiled wildly. That was good. That was interesting. Ma'am, Su Chui was as powerful as in the previous life. If she didn't get some stimulation, she would almost forget that she didn't come to find Ling Li in this life, but revenge. Crazy revenge. Clatter. It suddenly rained heavily. The raindrops fell on the ground and made a sound. The crowd suddenly dispersed. Only Ma'am. Su Chui was still watching the show in the Baiwei building. When she saw Su Li and Mammy Li gradually disappeared in the Desu town with wet packages, she finally couldn't help laughing happily. Wicked girl, no matter how brilliant you are this year, you still become a stray dog in my hands. In the dense forest, the bean-sized jade beads slapped on the leaves and made a bang-bang sound. Mammy Li was almost unable to open her eyes because of the rain. She carried the heavy wet quilt and asked loudly in the rain, "Miss, where are we going now? There is no shabby temple nearby for us to rest temporarily." The wound on Su Li's forehead had been washed by the rain and no blood could be seen. She turned her head and said, "Mammy, throw away the quilt. We can walk faster." Mammy Li opened her eyes widely. What did she see? Miss was smiling, and she smiled sweetly. Oh no. Is Miss too stimulated and a little confused? Mammy Li grasped the quilt in her hand more tightly. She pursed her lips and couldn't help crying. She wouldn't let Miss die halfway like what she did in the past. What are you thinking about? You look as if I'm dying. Su Li's peaceful words suddenly sounded beside Mammy Li. Mammy Li raised her head in amazement. She suddenly felt that the quilt in her hand had been thrown directly into the roadside ditch by Su Li. Chapter 72. Suddenly, a hand firmly grasped Mammy Li's clothes from behind. Mammy Li struggled for a long time but couldn't get down. She looked back and saw Su Li pointing to the valley not far away. We can sleep there. In the valley, Mammy Li followed Su Li to look around curiously. She didn't expect that the valley, which looked like a barren mountain on the surface, had a different world inside. How did the mist know this place? Thinking of this, Mammy Li was worried again. The exquisite bamboo buildings of these courtyards were no worse than those of the Jinyuan court. She knew that the owner of this place must have an extraordinary background. She didn't know whether the owner would let them live there. At this time, Fang Yuan came out of the bamboo building and saw Su Li. His expression suddenly changed. He quickly walked to her and asked in a deep voice, "What happened? How did you become like this?" Mammy Li looked at Fang Yuan and was confused. Wasn't this the work of the Baiwei building? What happened? Was it a master of a family who hid in the work and deliberately approached the miss? Su Li didn't answer and shook her head. Call Qingning and others here. I will take a bath first. I have something to say later. Okay. Fang Yuan glanced at Mammy Li and didn't ask anything. He turned around and ran to the yard. Mammy Li heard the conversation between them and was more confused. Why did Fang Yuan still respect the miss? Wow, Sister Li, you are back. Why are you wet all over? I will fetch the bath water for you. Fang Ling came over and screamed when she saw Su Li. She didn't care about the dirt and ran to the bamboo building with Su Li. After a while, Mammy Li sat in the bathtub and watched Fang Ling busy in the kitchen. Fong Ling originally wanted her to go to the bamboo building to take a bath with Su Li, but Mammy Li didn't dare to agree. She moved the bathtub to the kitchen and locked the door. "This, miss." Mammy Li thought for a long time and said, "May I ask where this place is and how you know my miss?" Fong Ling said without turning her head, "Mammy, you have so many questions. Didn't Sister Li tell you before? But since Sister Li brought you here, she certainly didn't intend to hide it from you. I will be merciful and tell you. All the houses here belong to Sister Li." Ah! Mammy Li was dumbfounded. This valley yard was actually the Mrs.? When exactly did it happen? She had been serving the young miss all this time, but she didn't know. Naturally, Mammy Li thought of Su Li's wisdom and mystery from time to time. She was stunned for a long time and suddenly sighed. She should have thought of it. On the second floor of the bamboo building, Su Li took a bath and put on a clean dress. Then she slightly cleaned the wound on her forehead. Soon, the scar could not be seen. The palm print on her face had long since faded away. In fact, with her current cultivation of Xiantian first stage, she could completely avoid all the injuries she had suffered during the day, but she didn't avoid any of them. Looking at the still immature face in the mirror, Su Li was stunned for a moment. Then she opened the door of the bamboo building and left. At this moment, in the yard, Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning and others were all present. Su Li glanced at them and sat at the head of the table. "Is your forehead okay?" With Fang Yuan's eyesight, he could see that Su Li's forehead was injured. Su Li shook her head and then briefly told them what happened in the school. Chu Qingning and Haydn gnashed their teeth and couldn't wait to beat the Yang family and Mam Su Chui to death. Fang Yuan stared at Su Li, and there seemed to be two clusters of small flames in his eyes. He was silent for a moment and asked, "What are you going to do?" "I tell you this, but I don't want you to deal with them directly." Su Li shook her head and said, "In the next few days, Haydn and you have to work hard. As for you, Fang Yuan." Su Li pondered for a moment and took out a jade token and put it in his hand. "Help me to check the details of the Yang family." Fang Yuan clenched the wooden token and nodded calmly. "I will set off immediately." "What about me? What about me?" Chu Qingning saw that even his younger brother had a task, so he couldn't help but ask immediately, "What can I do?" Su Li tilted her head and thought for a moment. "You look after the house." Chu Qingning looked bitter and immediately said to Haydn fiercely, "You look after the house. I will disguise myself and go out to inquire about the news." "Ah, why?" Haydn was suddenly unhappy and felt wronged. "Because I am your eldest brother." "Ah, eldest brother, don't hit me. I know I am wrong." The next day, the sky was cloudless and clear. Early in the morning, Chu Qingning took his younger brothers to inquire about the news in the town, while Su Li practiced in the bamboo building at ease. In the previous life, she had learned a lot of martial arts. In the inborn realm, she was only good at archery, swordsmanship, and poison. Now those insights were still there, but she needed to familiarize herself with them. There was no sword or bow in the valley. Su Li used a branch as a sword, which could play a familiar role. After dark, Chu Qingning and others came back one after another, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. They went to the Desu town and knew how much grievance Su Li had suffered. They were so angry that their eyes were red and they couldn't wait to tear down the byway building directly. Su Li worked hard to support the byway building. When the byway building became a cash cow, the Su family burned the bridge after crossing the river. They directly slandered Su Li and drove her out of the Su family. They didn't even leave her a place to sleep. If Su Li didn't say not to hurt the people of the Su family, he really wanted to poison all of them with the poisonous heart-biting insect. Su Li didn't ask them. She couldn't see the whole picture in one day. She had to wait. On the fifth day, Su Li finally appeared in the yard. Chu Qingning, who had been holding back for a long time, said with his saliva flying and teeth gnashing. He was really angry. Su Li was very calm after hearing it. She was not surprised at all. Sure enough, after the news that Su Li was driven out of the Su family came out, many people in the Desu town were suspicious. But then the Su family spread the news that Su Li was driven out of the Muyang girls' school because of her bad conduct, which made the Su family suffer unprecedented shame. In the past few days, the old lady of the Su family personally helped to manage the Baiwei building. Then she found that Su Li embezzled a lot of money and had an unclear relationship with many childs in private. Su Li's biological mother, Mrs. Zhu, was so angry that she directly passed out, which almost affected the fetus in her belly. Such a one-sided statement had caused many ignorant commoners to fall for it. But there were still many people who didn't believe it, especially Mr. Zhou and others who had tasted Su Li's craftsmanship. This was only the one-sided statement of the Su family. Now Su Li was driven out and disappeared, so it was impossible to confront it. Some people said that Su Li was guilty and didn't dare to show up. At that time, the old lady of the Su family slapped her, and many people saw it. If she didn't have a guilty conscience, she should hide. Mr. Zhou's prestige was extremely high, and his personal insistence also made many people skeptical. But then the Su family released another news that the precious beggar's chicken was not researched by Su Li at all, but the chef of the Baiwei building. He sure taught Su Li how to cook, but he was shamelessly robbed by Su Li in the end. Hearing the news, Mr. Zhou was also shocked and hurried to seek confirmation. Under the coercion of the Su family, he sure cooked a precious beggar's chicken. It seemed that he acquiesced to the fact as the Su family said. Mr. Zhou still had a lot of doubts in his heart, but his belief was shaken after all, and he no longer stood up to speak for Su Li. With the fall of Mr. Zhou, Su Li's notoriety and beauty reputation were spread in the entire Desu town. The little fairy that everyone in the Desu town praised, worshipped and yearned for in the past immediately became a heinous, unfilial, and slutty woman. Oh! Chu Qingning took a sip of tea and said angrily, "My dear, I have said so much. Can you give me some reaction? They are talking about you. Aren't you angry at all?" "I am very angry," Su Li said lightly, "so I want to raise the price. How many seasoning raw materials are there in the warehouse?" Chu Qingning's eyes immediately brightened. "A lot. At least 100 kilograms. Originally, you sold it for 1,000 taels per kilogram, and you can almost earn 200,000 taels." "Oh," Su Li said, "then let's raise it to 2,000. Chu Qingning frowned when he heard the words. "I'm afraid that's not possible, although the price has doubled. If you offer 50 kilograms at a time, they can also offer 100,000 taels. You can't cause them trouble at all." "Who said that I only sell 50 kilograms? Su Li raised her eyebrows when she heard the words. "Go with me tonight? Can I go with you?" Chu Qingning's eyes widened. It had always been a secret how Su Li sold the seasoning raw materials to the Su family. They consciously didn't ask more. They didn't expect that Su Li would ask him to go with her today. After a few days, Su Li's reputation in the Desu town was so bad that even Mei Ruhan in the Muyang girls' school heard about it. She could do nothing but silently pray for Su Li's safety. When Suzy Pei heard that Su Li had been successfully driven away by her grandma, she could wake up with a smile every day. After so many failures, she finally drove Su Li away before Su Qingtan came back. It was really a blessing. When Ning Yunji heard the news, he was so angry that his beard almost curled up. As the nominal senior fellow apprentice, if he didn't do something, he would be too ashamed to see Qi Shi when he came back. On this day, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Two figures, one tall and one short, stood beside the Sanha bridge. Chu Qingning was disguised by Su Li with potion, and then he took a poison to become fat. He completely changed from a handsome boy to a short, fat, and ugly man. Su Li's poisons are really endless. I hope this medicine doesn't have any side effects. Chu Qingning touched his round belly and was full of regret. If he knew it, he wouldn't come with Su Li. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, Su Li's cold eyes flashed. She saw two figures slowly appear on the other side of the Sanha bridge. They were Li Yin and Su Huanli, who hadn't seen each other for a long time. Su Huanli's face was glowing. It was unknown what happy event happened recently. He took out the bank note from his arms without hesitation and said, "I have prepared 50,000 taels." Li Yin stood aside silently as a guard. When he saw the extra person on the opposite side, he suddenly had an ominous premonition. He was afraid that this transaction would not be as smooth as the previous 3 times. 50,000 taels? Suli sneered in a hoarse voice. Her eyes were like a cold snake. What your Su family has done recently is really disgusting. Su Huanli's expression changed slightly, and he scolded coldly, Your Excellency, don't slander us. Our Su family is upright and upright. When did we do disgusting things? Besides, it's not your turn to care about the affairs of our Su family. The middle-aged man that Suli pretended to be heard a very funny joke. He laughed and bent down. His hoarse and unpleasant voice echoed in the night sky like a crow. You have done it, but you don't let others say it? You are really cheeky. Suli counted her fingers and said, Let me count. Your old man bribed ma'am Yang Chui to make things difficult for Suli. No matter whether she succeeds or not, she will be driven out of the Muyang girls' school in the end. Then, when Suli comes back, you will put on a play in the Byway building. You will hide those things in Suli's luggage and deliberately expose them in front of everyone to establish Suli's bad reputation. In the past few days, you have spent a lot of money to bribe the punks in the Tongnan Street to spread rumors everywhere. The effect is really good. Su Huanli's face, which was thicker than the city wall, was full of horror at the moment. It seemed that he was stripped of all his clothes and was seen naked. Li Yin's expression changed dramatically, and he couldn't help but ask, Your Excellency, you should be responsible for what you said. Is what you said true or false? Suli picked her nails and looked slightly annoyed. She said impatiently, Do I have the leisure to tell you stories? You are the housekeeper of the Su house, but you don't even know these. You are so stupid. Don't listen to him. What he said is false. Su Huanli woke up and immediately denied crazily, but he found that the latter took 2 steps back and looked at him in a strange way. Chapter 73. Deal? Su Huanli was vigilant and said, Apart from this, what else can I do for you? Yes, nothing else. Su Li laughed unscrupulously and said, So, I decide to raise the price. Raise it again? Su Huanli screamed. The price was raised from 800 taels to 1,000 taels when they met for the first time. How much would it be raised this time? 1,200. 2,000 taels. Su Li said it lightly, but Su Huanli was so scared that his heart stopped and his face turned pale. He said, It's impossible. I can't get 100,000 taels now. I respect you as a man with extraordinary abilities in Jianghu. Don't go too far. Respect me? Su Li leaned forward and sneered. Head of the Su family, sometimes you have to think before you speak. I took your Su family's things and sold them back to your Su family. If you had the ability, you would have killed me long ago. Do you think that I will be kind enough to lower the price if you say some polite words? Su Huanli held his breath and couldn't say a word. You said that I went too far? Su Li stood up straight and put her hands on her chest. She said arrogantly, Yes, I did. Your Su family bullied a little girl with your power. We are just jackals of the same lair. Don't think each other dirty. You. Su Huanli was so angry that he had an asthma attack. He said the word, you several times but didn't say a complete sentence. He and Ma'am Su Chui just took control of the Byway building and were ready to increase the sales of the beggar's chicken by relying on the Yang family. If there was no seasoning, this way would be blocked and even arouse the anger of the Yang family. The consequences would be unimaginable. Taking a deep breath, Su Huanli softened and said, Well, I will buy 25 caddies first. Give me 3 days to collect the remaining 50,000 taels, and then I will trade with you. Then he handed out 50,000 taels again and pinned it behind him. He clenched it so hard that it almost bled. With the current traffic of the Byway building, 25 caddies of raw materials could only support them for half a month. Within half a month, he must find a substitute for the seasoning. Otherwise, almost 80% of the money earned by the byway building would be given to the mysterious person. How could he be willing? Suli reached out to take the banknote and put it in her arms. Chu Qingning looked at it and touched his belly, feeling doubtful. Although they angered Su Huanli, in fact, they didn't hurt the Su family at all. What was the point of doing so? But at this time, Suli put away the notes and turned away. Su Huanli was immediately dumbfounded and hurriedly stopped her. Wait, did you forget to give me the raw materials? Oh, I forgot. Suli turned around and said with a smile, look at me. I almost forgot to tell you. I still have the last 200 caddies of raw materials here. Enough for your Su family to use until the new raw materials are planted next year. Either you buy all of them, or you don't even have to think about buying a single gene. Impossible. Su Huanli was shocked and said, 100 kilograms, that is 400,000 taels of silver. How can I have so much silver? That's your business. I don't care. Suli smiled sinisterly. Didn't I say that I will discuss a new deal with the head of the Su family? If you don't come at midnight 3 days later, I will feed all the raw materials to the pigs. Don't blame me for being merciless. Then, Suli raised the notes of 50,000 taels of silver in her hand and said, this is the storage fee. I will help you keep the raw materials well in 3 days. Su Huanli stared at Suli's face and trembled with anger. Suddenly, he turned his eyes and fainted because of anger. Master! Li Yin exclaimed and hurriedly held Su Huanli. Suli was expressionless and turned away. Back to the valley, Chu Qingning took the antidote to restore his original appearance. He didn't know what to say. He walked around with Suli and finally let out a long sigh. Suli, I used to think that my acting skills were very good. Today I see you. I really admit my defeat. Even if those people in Jianghu come in person, they can't act better than you. Suli removed the disguise and glanced at Chu Qingning. Are you praising me or insulting me? My father made me unhappy. Of course, I will make him more unhappy. But Chu Qingning scratched his head and said, does your Su family really have so much money? If not, do we really have to lose all the raw materials? No. Su Li's eyes flashed with inexplicable wisdom. As long as my grandma has a little brain, she will never allow that kind of thing to happen. What? Ma'am. Su Chui slammed her crutch so hard that the ground trembled slightly. She pointed at Su Huanli, who was at a loss, and said, you were extorted 200,000 taels of silver for nothing. You are such an evil son. Do you want to piss your mother off? Mother, I have no other way. Su Huanli explained the ins and outs clearly. The mysterious man is holding the lifeline of the byway building. If I don't give him the money, the good situation of the byway building will immediately collapse. Speaking of this, Su Huanli said with a bitter face, although the profit of the byway building in these months is very good, it is only 210,000 taels. Plus the business of the silk shop and the circulating funds of the family, a total of 300,000 taels of silver can be collected. There is a vacancy of 100,000 taels of silver, mother. Looking at Su Huanli's eager eyes, ma'am. Su Chui snorted and said, do you think it is so easy to bribe the Muyang girls' school? In order to bribe the Yang family, I spent more than 100,000 taels of silver. Now there are only 50,000 taels of silver left. Su Huanli was instantly dumbfounded and said, there are still 50,000 taels of silver. What should we do? Li Yin stood at the door and heard every word in the room. He also saved a sum of money in the past decades, which was enough to make up for the vacancy. However, he closed his eyes and stood still. He didn't mean to go in. The byway building was the painstaking efforts of the second Mississippi. Since the mother and son destroyed the bridge after crossing the river and drove the second Miss away, there was no need for the beggar's chicken in the byway building. There was no need for the beggar's chickens in the byway building to exist. It was good to let the mysterious man feed the pigs. Ma'am, Su Chui and Su Huanli discussed for a long time, but they couldn't make up for the rest of the money. The whole Su family was almost emptied. 350,000 taels of silver was the limit. In the Jinyuan court, Zhu Yin was basking in the sun in the yard. Suddenly she heard something. She sat up and saw Su Huanli coming from the door. "Master, why are you here?" Zhu Yin was surprised and said, "Zipei, pour tea for your father." Before Su Zipei picked up the teapot, Su Huanli had waved his hand to stop her. "Madam, I come to ask for help this time. Can you borrow 50,000 taels of silver from your mother's family? 1 month. I can pay it back in 1 month." Zhu Yin was embarrassed when she heard that. She didn't know how much money she had taken from her mother's family over the years. Now when she returned to her mother's family, even her parents would drive her out. How could she borrow a penny? "Master, it's not that I don't want to help you, but I really—" Seeing Zhu Yan's expression, Su Huanli, who had been suppressed by anger, suddenly burst out. He snorted coldly and said, "Usually, you don't hesitate to take money from the accounting room. When the family is in trouble, you don't give me a penny. You are really a good wife." Zhu Yin seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer in her heart. She was so angry that she burst into tears. She said, "Master, how can you say that? If I have a penny, I will give it to you. But I have helped my mother a lot before, and there is no money left. You complain like this. What do you think of me?" Su Huanli woke up and regained his reason. Seeing that Zhu Yin began to cry again, and the 50,000 taels of silver had not been realized, he felt bored for no reason. He flung his sleeves and left the Jinyuan court without saying a word of comfort. Zhu Yin looked at the empty doors stupidly, and tears fell from her face. She pretended to cry before, but now she really cried. "Mother, don't cry. You will suffer if the fetus is affected." Su Zipei came to comfort her in a hurry. Zhu Yin covered her belly and slowly leaned on the pillow of the rattan chair. She said in a faint voice, "Your mother entrusted the wrong person. Zipei, you must rely on that to recognize the ancestors and return to the family so that your mother can live a good life. Do you know?" Su Zipei bit her lips and said, "I will not let you down." For a whole day, Su Huanli was busy with money. The Zhu family had no chance. He went to visit the Yang family, but he was directly rejected. Because of Su Yuezhu, the Yang family had no contact with the Su family. Su Huanli also heard that the Yang family seemed to want to divorce his wife. Su Huanli was so anxious that he had no time to care about Su Yuezhu's life or death. He immediately went to the Wanong Native Bank. But when the Wantong Native Bank heard that Su Huanli suddenly wanted to borrow 50,000 taels of silver, it immediately felt that something was wrong. Because the Su family should be rich now. For the sake of prudence, the shopkeeper of the native bank offered 10% interest per day. 50,000 taels of silver rolled interest in a month. Su Huanli had to exchange hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for the native bank. How could he accept it? He had to go home. "It seems that I can only do that." Su Huanli was a little distressed. He immediately called Li Yin and gave detailed instructions. At night, Fang Yuan returned to the yard in the valley. After seeing Su Li, he handed the investigation files to Su Li without saying anything. It turned out that the Chui family, where Ma'am Su Chui came from, was not an ordinary family. In the early years, it was a rich and powerful family in the Qinghe province. But later, it offended a noble and was forced to disband. Because Ma'am Su Chui had always been in the Su family, she was not affected. She also held 5 shops in the Qinghe province. This time, the Yang family was willing to help. In addition to the business of the Baiwei building, Ma'am Su Chui also promised to give the Yang family 2 shops in the Qinghe province. Even if the 2 shops were not used by the Yang family, it was very cost-effective to rent them out. The Yang family was concerned about the interests, and Ma'am Yang Chui helped to promote the cooperation between the 2 families. Su Li was easily kicked out. Although on the surface, Su Li did not take a penny at all. The current circulating capital of the Su family is also estimated by the Tianya house. Fang Yuan learned Su Li's plan from Chu Qingning and immediately said, "If we don't sell 1 or 2 shops in the Qinghe province, we can't get 400,000 taels." Su Li pushed away the files and looked at Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning with her chin on her hand. She said with a smile, "In this way, we will soon have the first or even the second shop. Which one of you will go to the Qinghe province?" I will go. Chu Qingning raised his eyebrows and boasted, Su Li, you have to believe my acting skills. They are excellent. Su Li smiled more and nodded slightly without saying anything. Seeing this, Fang Yuan couldn't help but smile gently. She was still herself and was not affected by the gossip at all. That night, Su Li disguised Chu Qingning, and Chu Qingning rushed to the Qinghe province overnight. On the next day, it was dawn. In the center of the Qinghe province, the streets of the Qinghe town were already crowded with vehicles. From time to time, people could see a carriage with ancient decorations passing by. The location of the Chui family's shop could only be regarded as medium, but the land was not cheap. If it was sold at the original price, it would cost 70,000 or 80,000 taels. At this moment, a shop of the Chui family had been emptied. Su Huanli only felt that every minute and every second was torturous. Although it was winter, his clothes were almost soaked with sweat. Tomorrow was the third day. If he couldn't transfer the shop before that, the Baiwei building would be finished. He specially went to the Tianya house to estimate the price of the shop. The land was worth 80,000 taels. He gritted his teeth and directly cut off 30,000 taels and sold it at 50,000 taels. As expected, many people came to inquire in detail. But when they heard that the delivery would be finished in 2 days, the group of businessmen hesitated for fear of fraud. There were many cheats nowadays. They had to investigate clearly before they dared to take action. Chapter 74. After waiting for a whole day, no one came to ask about the price. Su Huanli was so worried that he almost pulled out his hair. As the sun went down, Qinghe province was also busy. However, there were fewer pedestrians on the street where Su Huanli was. Occasionally, he saw 1 or 2 pedestrians passing by. Gradually, the moon rose to the middle of the sky. The whole Qinghe province was quiet. People were asleep, but the oil lamps in the shops were still on. Master, it's late. Lin tidied up the temporary bed and couldn't help but remind him. Su Huanli sat at the door, still unmoved. The sun of the third day gradually rose. Su Huanli's eyes were bloodshot. He stared at the pedestrians outside the door. His expression was like that of an evil ghost, almost choosing people to eat. Boldly, reduce the price. Reduce it to 40,000 or 50,000 taels. I don't believe that no one wants such a good shop. Su Huanli squeezed a few words from his teeth. Lin shook his head, took off the paper pasted on the door, changed the price, and pasted it again. But still, no one came to ask. Seeing that it was going to be noon, Su Huanli's heart was completely cold. When he thought that the Baiwei building, which earned hundreds of thousands of taels a month, was about to collapse, his heart was bleeding. At this moment, Chu Qingning appeared in front of the shop. He looked at the price posted in front of the shop, smiled, and walked into the shop. As soon as he appeared, he immediately attracted Su Huanli's attention. The more he looked at him, the more shocked he was. This person was obviously a young man and wore the servant's style, but his clothes were made of good satin. Moreover, the faint aura of wealth made Su Huanli immediately guess that this young man must be a servant with a high status in a big family. May I ask, are you interested in the shop? Su Huanli laughed and wanted to ask with a fist and palm salute. Chu Qingning smiled bitterly and said, Master, don't make fun of me. However, my master is a little interested in it. Su Huanli's guess came true. He was more excited and said repeatedly, Little brother, your master really has a good eye. If it weren't for the urgent need of money at home, I wouldn't sell such a good shop at a low price. The house has just been built for a few years. Before Su Huanli finished his words, Chu Qingning frowned and interrupted, Master, don't make a mistake. If our family's young master buys the land, he will definitely tear down the house and rebuild it. You should talk about something else. Su Huanli's smile was slightly stiff, and he immediately changed his words. That's right, that's right. How about I bring you to have a look at the land? Chu Qingning nodded and then strolled slowly in the shop. Although Su Huanli was anxious, he did not dare to urge Chu Qingning for fear of scaring him away. Chu Qingning looked at Su Huanli with a cold sweat and laughed in his heart. After walking for a while, when the sun was about to set, he stopped and pointed to the shop next to him. Whose shop is that? It's also mine. Su Huanli replied quickly, that shop is a little small and no one rents it. This shop originally had a tenant, but because of urgent family matters, I paid him a sum of money and moved him away. I see. Chu Qingning picked his nails and looked a little dissatisfied. To be honest, your land is a little smaller than my master thought, but my master is not short of money. I'm going to buy both of your shops. The price is 50,000 yuan. What do you think? Only 50,000 yuan for 2 shops. Su Huanli almost scolded. What was the difference between this and robbing? What's wrong? It seems that you are not willing to. Forget it, Chu Qingning said and walked away without any reluctance. At the moment when he stepped aside, the twilight shone on Su Huanli's face, which immediately made Su Huanli completely sober. Little brother, please wait. Just in the 2 days when Su Huanli left, there were new changes in the Daisu town. It turned out that the headmaster of the Muyang school personally sent someone to put a letter on the official notice board of the Daisu town, which told the general thing about Su Li in the Muyang girls' school. On the surface, Su Li just returned to the town to rest temporarily. It was not as the Su family said, that she was driven out of the Su family because of her bad conduct. This notice suddenly shocked the people in the whole town. The Su family's face had been slapped resoundingly. Why did the Su family say that Su Li was so unbearable? Do you still remember that the mammy of Miss Su said that it was all framed by the old lady of the Su family? In the past, Miss Su was in charge of the Baiwei building. Maybe the old lady of the Su family was really jealous, so she tried to kick Miss Su out of the Su family. Old bastard. He even came up with such a vicious plan to force Miss Su Li to leave. Now there is no news about her. Is it possible that Miss Su Li has been killed by the old lady? I still remember that Miss Su Li was also driven out of the Su family a year ago. It seems that the Su family is very dirty. The people who were deceived were angry. In less than 1 day, several versions were fabricated. For a time, the Su family became a bully family that everyone had the right to punish. Ma'am, Su Chui was so angry that she almost went to see the king of hell. She didn't expect that the people of the Muyang girls' school were so unappreciative. What on earth did the Yang family do? Mother, what should we do now? Zhu Yin hurriedly asked. I heard that the Baiwei building is now deserted. Everyone says that the Su family has a bad character. No matter how delicious the food in the Baiwei building is, they will not go there. Ning Yunji, the old and pedantic scholar. Ma'am. Su Chui looked resentful and said with hatred, I will settle accounts with you sooner or later. Old lady, bad news. Outside the door, an old mammy ran in panic with a lot of leaves hanging on her head. She said, the people in the Daisu town are crazy. They carry the manure of each family and put it in front of the Baiwei building. They say that if Miss Su is not innocent, they will turn the Baiwei building into a manure tank. What? Ma'am. Su Chui couldn't help but show a shocked expression. She hurriedly said, these untouchables are really rebellious. Go and report it to the government. Go quickly. The old mammy rolled and crawled out of the room. After the officers and soldiers were dispatched, the riot was temporarily suppressed. But the gate of the Su family was inevitably splashed with several basins of manure. The smell was terrible. When Su Li got the news, she changed her appearance and opened the Baichaotang. Many people were injured by the officers and soldiers. As soon as she opened the door, a group of injured people came in immediately. Dr. Shueli, you finally opened the door. The officers and soldiers are too much. Dr. Shueli, where have you been these days? I haven't seen the Baichaotang open for a long time. Many old customers came over and asked. Su Li smiled slightly and kept diagnosing. She said, I went on a long trip and came back to have a look today. I also heard about the things of the Su family. I know Miss Su's character very well, But the Su family is a bit difficult to explain, Su Li said lightly and didn't talk about it in detail. Her attitude gave everyone a boost of confidence. They were more convinced that Su Li was wronged. Dr. Shui Li practices medicine to help people. She is indifferent to fame and fortune. What she said must be right. Even Dr. Shui Li said so. I believe her. I remember that Dr. Shui Li's master, Dr. Qi, once went to the Su family to be a teacher. He must know a lot about the Su family. Now Dr. Shui Li said so. It seems that the Su family is really weird. Under Su Li's encouragement, many people immediately joined the team to harass the Su family. Ma'am, Su Chui had no choice but to take out the last bit of money and let Li Shanbao order that anyone who made trouble would be arrested and put in jail. Then the chaos subsided. At this moment, Su Huanli came back from Qinghe province with 400,000 taels of silver. He rushed to Sanhe Bridge without stopping. He had no time to know that the Baiwei building was now closed. In the middle of the night, Su Li appeared on time and handed all the remaining raw materials to Su Huanli. Looking at Su Huanli's relieved expression, she suddenly let out a chuckle and then turned into a ray of starlight and disappeared. The inborn realm. Li Yin's pupil shrank, as if he saw several horrible things. He remembered that this person was obviously in the acquired 9th hurdle a few months ago, but he broke through to the inborn realm so quickly. Could it be that this person was seriously injured and was originally in the inborn realm? Now he was treated with the money of the Su family and his injury had been improved. Li Yin's eyes flashed with deep fear. He helped Su Huanli push the cart and left quickly, as if there was a ghost chasing behind him. The inborn senior was the real supreme person in the martial arts circle. Su Li took 400,000 taels of silver back to the valley. Chu Qingning looked at the banknotes piled high on the table and almost drooled. 400,000 taels of silver. It's the first time for me to see so much money in my life. Chu Qingning couldn't help but laugh. The old guy was fooled by me and had no time to go back to the Desu town. When he knew that the Baiwei building was closed, his face must be very interesting. Su Li supported her chin and moved half of the bank notes to Chu Qingning, who was laughing. Qingning, you have to work hard next. What? Chu Qingning looked at the bank notes of 200,000 taels of silver in front of him and couldn't help but swallow. Pull down the 2 shops and rebuild them, Su Li said and took out a stack of drawings and put them on the table. Hire the best craftsmen and make sure to finish it in the shortest time. Chu Qingning was instantly dumbfounded. He didn't expect that his lie to trick Su Huanli to buy the 2 shops would come true. Fang Yuan picked up the drawings and looked at them one by one. Although he didn't understand many specific structures, he could see that the structure of these drawings was extremely extraordinary. He couldn't help but look up and ask, Su Li, did you draw all these? What else? Su Li smiled and squinted her eyes like a crescent moon. She thought in her heart, of course, what belongs to the disabled husband is mine. Fang Yuan smiled bitterly and sighed. Is there anything you can't do? He was afraid that he was not qualified to compete for such a person. Only a young master like that person had a little possibility. However, even if he just stayed with her and protected her silently, it was also a kind of happiness. Fang Yuan thought like this and smiled warmly. Let's go to have supper first. Ling is ready. Su Li put away the rest of the banknotes. The 3 of them and Fang Ling had a rare good mood. At the same time, Su Huanli returned home and heard the news in the Desu town. He was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground unconscious. Chapter 75. In front of the main courtyard of the Su house, ma'am. Su Chui stood in front of Su Huanli's room with a pale face and crutches. She saw Su Huanli lying on the bed and still didn't wake up. She could still smell the stench of feces. Ning Yunji, it's not over. Ma'am. Su Chui's wrinkled face was full of resentment. She and Ning Yunji were of the same generation. All girls at the age of 16 or 17 yearned for love. At that time, Ning Yunji was a talent in the Qinghe province. She plucked up her courage to express her feelings, but she was flatly refused by him. She would never forget this humiliation for the rest of her life. At this moment, in the Muyang school, Ning Yunji made a pot of tea and drank it by himself. Ning Qing was not by his side. Yang Wenmin, who was sitting opposite to Ning Yunji, raised his eyebrows. Did this old guy forget to pour tea for him? He took the teapot and said faintly while pouring tea, Ning Yunji, what do you think? A wise man submits to circumstances. Don't lose the position of the headmaster of the Muyang school for Su Li. Ning Yunji didn't even look at Yang Wanmin. He looked down at the tea and narrowed his eyes. He said, Yang family's boy, why do you ask when you know the answer? Your father knows best what kind of person I am. It's a pity that the Yang family only cares about money in your generation. The academy is a holy land for scholars, but now it has become a trading place for people like you who reek of money. It's no longer fit to be a school, so why should I stay here? Ning Yunji said and waved his hand as if he was driving away a fly. Get out of here. I will leave the school tomorrow. You can do whatever you like. Haha. I really want to see how the Yang family will decline in your hands. You. The blue veins on Yang Wenmin's forehead were exposed. He pinched Ning Yunji's neck with one hand. His eyes were terrifying. He said, Old bastard, if you irritate me again, believe it or not, I will directly twist your head off. Haha. Ning Yunji smiled, and his face didn't change at all. Humph. What a stubborn old man. Yang Wenmin retracted his hand, snorted coldly, and left with his men. Old man, remember this. If you still stay here tomorrow, I won't hold back anymore. When Yang Wenmin's figure disappeared, Ning Yunji stopped smiling and looked a little worried. The next day, the news that Ning Yunji resigned as the headmaster of the Muyang school spread throughout the Muyang town. Mei Ruhan and others who knew the inside story felt cold. Even the headmaster was driven away by the Yang family. Su Li, sure enough, when the news of Ning Yunji's resignation was released in the morning, the result of Su Li's handling came out in the afternoon and was posted on the bulletin board of the Muyang Girls' School. Su Li from the Desu town. You have no respect for your teachers in the school, and you are arrogant because of your talent. You have insulted the elite lecturer of our school. You are so angry that you have to lie in bed for several days. Your behavior is so bad that you are the shame of Muyang, the shame of Qinghe County, the shame of Dahan Country. Therefore, the academy has decided to expel him from the academy to prove his innocence. Su Li is only 15 years old, but she is so unruly and unruly. The academy was worried that the other academies would be deceived by him, so they issued a ban on him. No school in the Qinghe province would accept Su Li as a student, in case she misleads the public and disturbs the government. In addition, Mei Ruhan of the Mei family is guilty of covering up Su Li. She is also ordered to withdraw from the school and go home to repent. If she doesn't repent, she can't return to the school. I hope the Mei family can help her to mend her ways and get rid of the influence of the evil girl as soon as possible. A piece of cold paper was poured over everyone's head like ice water. Mei Ruhan looked at the bulletin board and her tears fell down. The grievance in her heart drowned her like a tide. Why? It is Mrs. Yang who hurts people. Why is Su Li responsible for all the mistakes in the end? Miss Guo couldn't help crying. The miss who cooked well was not only driven out of the family, but also suffered injustice. The world was too unfair. Miss, let's go. The old butler of the Mei family sighed. It was not a matter of who was right and who was wrong. The Yang family obviously wanted to establish their power by taking the little girl. The influence of the Mei family was not as good as that of the Yang family. What could they do? The news of the Muyang school soon spread to the Desu town and caused a stir. Even Ning Yunji was slandered. It was said that he had an affair with Su Li, so he tried his best to protect her. The situation in the Desu town was stirred up again. The common people only heard the hearsay. How could they know the truth behind the incident? They immediately blamed Su Li. Every day, a large group of people went to the Su house to apologize. After hearing the news that the lord of the Su family was angry, many people sent him tonics, which made Mam Su Chui very happy. The Yang family did a good job. They not only saved the situation, but also made Ning Yunji shameless. It was really delightful. In the yard in the valley, Chu Qingning pushed open the door of the bamboo building with a livid face and said, "Su Li, have you heard the news?" Su Li played with the medicine bottle and said without raising her head, "Of course I have heard it. Then why don't you give some response?" Chu Qingning was so angry that he was about to go crazy. The Yang family is really hateful. I will reward them with 100,000 poisonous heart-biting insects. Stand out. A cold shout made Chu Qingning stunned. It was the first time for him to hear such a cold voice from Su Li. He slowly turned around and saw Su Li's cold eyes. He couldn't help but shiver and immediately felt that he was in a world of ice and snow. Wait. Su Li's voice was low and hoarse. The Yang family is a little annoying. Since she was reborn, she had been enjoying the pleasure of teasing the Su family. But since the Yang family intervened, the grasshopper of the Su family seemed to climb over her head. She would feel fresh for the first time, but she was annoyed for the second time. Then what are you waiting for? Chu Qingning was very anxious, but Su Li still shook her head. There is no senior in the acquired realm. I can kill them all by myself. Chu Qingning was very anxious, but Su Li shook her head. I haven't thought about how to kill them. Wait. Huh. Chu Qingning opened his mouth and didn't say a word. It turned out that Su Li meant wait. You don't have to worry about this kind of trifle. Su Li took the branch beside the table and casually waved it in the air. When we go to the Qinghe province and Yunjing in the future, our opponents will not be such small figures. We will even be enemies with the Enma cult. You should be prepared. Chu Qingning was slightly stunned, and then he nodded calmly. After getting along with her for a few months, even though he knew that the girl was eccentric and ruthless, he didn't know why he seemed to be sure that as long as he followed Su Li, he would reach the top one day and see more. Perhaps only in this way could he have a glimmer of possibility to find her. Suddenly, Fong Ling and Haydn ran in a panic. Something bad happened. Sister Li, Mammy Li was arrested by the government. Su Li's eyes were fixed and she said in a low voice, "What happened?" "It's all my fault." Fong Ling lowered her head and said, "I asked Mammy Li to accompany me to buy vegetables today. Mammy Li disguised herself and thought that no one would recognize her. But she was recognized by the government and was arrested directly. Haydn and I came back as soon as we saw it." Su Li put down the branch and stood up. Then she went out without saying anything. Chu Qingning said anxiously, "Don't go out. Maybe they arrested Mammy Li for you." Su Li turned a deaf ear to it. She took a bamboo hat and disappeared in the valley in the blink of an eye. Chu Qingning was anxious and hurried to follow her. Fong Ling immediately ran to the yard to find Fong Yuan, who was practicing. When Su Li came to the town, she saw that the byway building was surrounded by people at a glance. She squeezed in quietly and saw Mammy Li kneeling on the ground under the pressure of the government. Her pupils darkened, and she didn't go out immediately. Lord Li has ordered that Su Li is a slut and Scourge is a man of a good family. She is the shame of the Desu town. The traitor is guilty of adultery and will be arrested immediately. If people know that Su Li took it out, they can report it to the government. Mammy Li is still in the Desu town, which means that Su Li is still nearby. Su Li, if you don't show up, Mammy Li will suffer the pain of whipping. Think about it clearly. With the shout of the government advisor, the onlookers immediately exclaimed. But no one complained for Su Li. It's actually this crime. If Su Li is caught, she will be drowned in a pig cage. Even if she is not dead, she will be disabled. Mammy Li followed the wrong master. She is so unlucky. Haha, Su Li the bitch deserves this punishment. How could Su Li care about the life of servants? I am afraid that she has already escaped. Poor Mammy Li. Chu Qingning was anxiously looking for Su Li in the crowd. When he heard the government announcement, he was furious and said, Su Li, don't be stupid. She is there. Finally, Chu Qingning saw Su Li in the front of the crowd. He was relieved and squeezed over. But he suddenly saw Su Li step out and take off the bamboo hat. Oh no. Are you looking for me? Suli looked indifferent. Her long hair was like splashed ink. She was like a fairy who was above the common people. She said, "Let Mammy Lee go, and I will go back with you." The advisor was shocked when he saw Suli, and a strong desire flashed through his eyes. "Very good, Suli. You can take the initiative to come to justice. Maybe Lord Lee will be generous and exempt you from death." The advisor waved his hand and said, "Tie Suli up and go back to the mansion immediately." When Suli saw the officers and soldiers rushing over, she immediately stepped back and said loudly, "Why don't you let Mammy Lee go? Can the government break its promise?" The advisor's proud expression froze, and then he waved his hand impatiently and let Mammy Lee go. The little girl dared to be stubborn even when she was about to die. When they returned to the mansion, he would punish her. Maybe the county magistrate would find his conscience, and he could get some benefits. Thinking of this, the advisor glanced at Suli's sensitive parts without a trace, and the desire in his eyes was stronger. "Miss." Mammy Lee was let go. She rushed to Suli and grabbed her sleeves tightly. Her eyes were full of tears and her lips trembled. "You shouldn't come. They must have colluded. If you are caught, you will definitely die. You can't go." Suli shook off Mammy Lee expressionlessly and whispered, "Go to meet with them. I will be fine." Being reminded, Mammy Lee suddenly remembered Fong Yuan and others. "Yes, hurry to find Master Fong to save the miss." She immediately rushed into the crowd and disappeared. The people around looked at her with disdain. The officers and soldiers rushed to escort Suli back to the mansion. Suli frowned and scolded, "Let go. I can walk by myself." An invisible deterrent spread out. The officers and soldiers all felt cold in their hearts and actually stopped. When the advisor saw this scene, he was immediately angry and scolded, "Suli, do you still think that you are the second miss of the Su family? Since you don't want to be escorted, come on, put on the rope." Crack! Two officers and soldiers immediately came over with 2 pieces of wood. When the 2 pieces of wood were put together, they could just jam people's necks and hands. Then they were restrained with chains, like dogs being led by people. The advisor even asked Suli to put on the shameful rope. When Chu Qingning and Fong Yuan in the crowd saw this scene, their eyes suddenly turned red. They couldn't help but rush out to kill the next moment. Suddenly, Chapter 76. When the advisor was in a panic, a golden scroll flew from the sky and smashed on his face. "Ouch! Who hit me?" The advisor was furious and grabbed the scroll with one hand. Suddenly, he stared at the scroll in his hand blankly. His hands couldn't stop trembling as if he was holding a hot potato. This was the decree of the Qinghe provincial governor. The provincial governor was in charge of a county in Dahan country. He was a real governor and had the power to kill countless people. Li Shanbao and the provincial governor were like the stars and the moon. They were not at the same level at all. As a young advisor, he was like a nonentity in front of the provincial governor. But today, he actually got the decree of the provincial governor. The advisor was so excited that he forgot about Suli and looked up. There were more than 20 people coming. They looked cold and their eyes were like lightning. Their vigor rushed to the sky. They were all riding horses that could travel thousands of miles in a day. Their clothes were shining with golden light. The uniform golden pattern of the Qinghe provincial government was tattooed on their chests. It seemed that they were all the elite soldiers of the Qinghe provincial government. The leader was a woman in a cyan cloak. Her face was slightly pale. It was obvious that she didn't feel well all the way. When Suli saw the woman, she slightly raised her eyebrows and didn't speak. The woman in cyan glanced at Suli and then saw the 2 officers and soldiers beside Suli holding the jiajia. She snorted coldly and shouted, "Control all the officers and soldiers." Before she finished her words, the elite soldiers behind the woman dismounted without saying anything and quickly controlled the advisor and the officers and soldiers who didn't dare to resist. "Lord, It's all a misunderstanding. The advisor was held by two elite soldiers on both sides. He was so scared that he was trembling all over. Lord! Just then, Li Shanbao in an official uniform ran to her in a panic and bowed. Lord, you came from afar. I didn't get the news and didn't welcome you. It's my fault. Lord Li, you don't have to greet me. When the woman in science saw Li Shanbao, she said with a faint smile, I'm not a member of the imperial court. I don't deserve your salute. I'm just here to issue a decree on behalf of the satrap. Li Shanbao was scared and broke into a cold sweat. He said involuntarily, the decree of the satrap? Could it be that the secret of his corruption for so many years was exposed? The woman in green nodded towards the elite soldier on the advisor's side. The elite soldier who was holding the advisor immediately snatched the golden scroll from the advisor's hand and opened it. I heard that there is a girl named Suli in the Desu town, unparalleled in talent and learning at the tender age of 15. He understands the true meaning of the Tongzi of Dahan, which makes the head of Muyang Mansion feel inferior. He has been in school for 3 days, and he has subdued the senior embroidery artificer of Muyang Town with his profound knowledge of embroidery. He is also proficient in embroidery skills. He is really a genius. I'm very comforted, but I can't just sit back and watch you die in the Desu town. Therefore, Suli, the second daughter of the Su family in the Desu town, was invited as an honorary lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School. I hope you can continue to work hard in the Qinghe Girls' School and live up to your talent. Whoosh! The onlookers were so shocked that their eyes almost popped out. There were many troubles in the Desu town these days, but none was more shocking than this one. The name of Su Li was heard by the satrap of Qinghe province. Moreover, she became a lecturer of the girls' school at the age of 15. What an honor it was! For a moment, all eyes were focused on Li Shanbao and the advisor. Those eyes were full of anger for being deceived, but more of indescribable weirdness and gloating. The expression of the advisor and Li Shanbao was gradually distorted. Finally, they were petrified in the wind as if they were immobilized. There were hundreds of words in the decree, but it only mentioned one person, and this person turned out to be Su Li, whom they conspired to kill. Now, something big was going to happen. Li Shanbao was the first to react. He was so scared that his voice changed. What are you doing? Throw away these shameful things. The two soldiers holding the wooden armor were pale. When they saw all the elite soldiers of Qinghe province looking at them, they couldn't stand such stimulation. They rolled their eyes and fainted. Li Shanbao's face was very ugly. He bowed and forced a smile that was uglier than crying. Lord, these are all misunderstandings. It's the fault of the Su family and the Yang family. I also, Lord Li. The woman in indigo directly interrupted Li Shanbao and smiled sweetly. If you have something to say, you'd better go to Qinghe province. I am not an official. I have already made it clear, haven't I? Li Shanbao's face was extremely bitter. It turned out that the woman in indigo said, not in the imperial court, actually wanted him to go to Qinghe province to plead guilty. The Qinghe Girls' School was the first school in Qinghe province. Its nature was comparable to the official government. If it was true that he offended the lecturer of such a school, he could argue for it. But he, the Yang family and the Su family all knew that everything was fabricated by them. It couldn't stand the investigation at all. Thinking of this, Li Shanbao couldn't help but tremble. A sense of suffocation rose from the bottom of his heart. Su Li was standing not far from him, but he couldn't move. Today, he almost sent Su Li to drown in the pig cage. Such a great hatred. How could it be useful to plead for her? After dealing with the matter, the woman in indigo walked to Su Li. Her eyes were cold and her voice was extremely low. This is the opportunity that my father exchanged for with his lifetime reputation. If you let him down, I will not let you go. Su Li heard the words and her eyes flashed. She figured out the cause and effect. It turned out that the old teacher was the headmaster of the Muyang Girls' School. No wonder he was so protective of her. Lecturer Ning was also the daughter of the headmaster. Although she didn't know what Ning Yunji promised in front of the satrap, the price was definitely not small. But she was very confused about one thing. Why did the old teacher do so much for her? It seemed unreasonable just because she was a student of the Muyang girls' school. She was afraid that this doubt could not be solved until Qi Xianqing came back. Thinking of this, Su Li nodded gently. The woman in indigo was still unhappy. But this was her father's request, so she could only do it. This scene fell into the eyes of Li Shanbao and the advisor, but it was a performance of intimacy between the two. Li Shanbao regretted and cursed in his heart. Those grandsons of the Yang family said that Su Li was easy to bully. What was the background of the woman in indigo? She could even invite the Qinghe province. How could she say that she had no background? Pass the order. Thoroughly investigate the matter about Su Li within 3 days. 3 days later, we will return to the Qinghe province and make the clues into a file and give it to the satrap. As the woman in indigo gave a light order, all the elite soldiers roared in response. Li Shanbao blacked out and fell to the ground. It was over. In the Jinyuan court of the Su house, Su Li and Mammy Li returned to the old house. One was expressionless, and the other was complicated. Mammy Li thought that she had experienced ups and downs with the old miss in her life, but it was far less exciting than these days. The confrontation between the old miss and the Su family and the Yang family changed almost every day. When she thought that she almost got the old miss into trouble and put the old miss in prison, her heart seemed to be grasped fiercely, and she felt very uncomfortable. This guilt could not disappear. She could only rely on taking care of the old miss more carefully in the future to repay the old miss. Old miss, please bless me in heaven. I found a master who can be entrusted to me. Although she has many secrets and even makes me afraid sometimes, she is very good to me. Old miss, you can rest assured. In the kitchen, Mammy Li took out half of the jade pendant from her arms and closed her eyes to pray silently. Su Li stood in the empty study with her eyes slightly narrowed. She was silent. Ning Qing looked around and frowned slightly. The decoration here was very luxurious, but it was too vulgar. If this was Su Li's taste, then when she went to the Qinghe province, her father would be laughed at together with her. Did you live here before? She couldn't help but ask. Su Li nodded. My mother changed the decoration here, and it has changed beyond recognition. Ning Qing's expression was slightly relaxed. She had heard about the current situation of the Su family. Su Li was born in such a family and could be so outstanding, which showed her ability. According to her temperament, she would have broken off the relationship and run away from home long ago. You deal with the family affairs these 3 days. 3 days later, go to the Qinghe province with me. My father is still waiting for you there. Hearing Ning Qing's words, Su Li nodded and said, Lecturer Ning, can I take another person to the Qinghe girls' school? Ning Qing frowned and suddenly felt that Su Li was insatiable and didn't know what was good for her. But she still suppressed her temper and asked, Who do you want to take? If it is Mammy Li, it is no problem. After all, she is the mammy who takes care of you. But if you want to take someone to study at the Qinghe girls' school, it is impossible. Do you know that your situation is still not safe now? Su Li shook her head and said, It is Mei Ruhan. She was also dropped out of school. But I think it is no problem for her to be admitted to the Qinghe girls' school according to the normal procedures. Can we take her with us? It turns out to be her. Ning Qing suddenly understood and her face was slightly hot. She thought that Su Li wanted to play favoritism, but she measured the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Mei Ruhan was really a good child. This time she was involved in the Yang family, so it was reasonable that Su Li wanted to take her with her. Since it is not through the back door, it is no problem for us to take her with us. I will send someone to inform the Mei family. Ning Qing nodded and left directly with others. She didn't even look at Su Huanli, who stood beside like a servant. When Ning Qing went out of the gate of the Jinyuan court, Su Huanli retracted his head. Then he straightened up with a bitter face and said in a trembling voice, Li, I didn't expect that the Yang family was so cruel. Those things were done by your grandma behind my back. Don't misunderstand your father. Su Huanli was still lying comfortably on the bed. When he heard what happened in the town, he was so scared that he immediately jumped up from the bed. He didn't vomit blood or have a headache. He ran all the way to the Jinyuan court and drove Su Zipei and Zhu Yan out. Then he cleaned up quickly to show his attitude. He was really scared. Although Su Li was very filial in ordinary days, she almost died this time. Although he didn't directly participate in it, he didn't stop it. He just watched ma'am. Su Chui forced Su Li into a dead end. Su Li sat calmly at the desk and played with the writing brush. She said nothing. Su Huanli was even more flustered and said, "Li, forgive your father. Your father had no choice but to do it. I couldn't stop your grandmother from doing it. I kneel down for you, okay?" Su Huanli knelt down with a plop and cried. Su Li sighed and got up to help Su Huanli up. She said softly, "Daddy, how can I blame you? Even grandma and mother, I won't let them go to jail. But I don't understand why my grandma and mother treat me like that when I didn't do anything. What did I do wrong?" You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.